Percerad family is the oldest, most mysterious, and most sinister family of alchemists known to history. In their quest to understand the laws of the universe and find a way to attain divinity through the physical form, these mad alchemists once unleashed terrible biological disasters across the earth. However, 300 years ago, for unknown reasons, the family fell into decline. Isao Percerad, the family's only talented descendant and the greatest alchemist of that century, vowed to create biological weapons capable of rivaling the gods and restore his family's glory. He rejoices because, at that very moment, the most powerful biochemical weapon, the final calamity created by him, the greatest alchemist, after 400 days of tireless effort, is about to be completed. He tells the rat to begin the final phase and focus on the purity of the Azov culture fluid, which must not fall below 70%. The rat becomes irritated as he has told the protagonist countless times not to call him a filthy rat. He is the biochemical modification assistant, the gray rat, and chief assistant, Cheese. The assistant reports that the culture fluid's purity is currently at 99%. The test subject's heart rate is 15 beats per minute. Her body temperature is approximately 25 degrees, and her vital signs are stable. Isao tells him to add 52 grams of black sulfur to the culture tank to remove excess impurities and harmful bacteria from the test subject. As soon as his assistant adds the black sulfur, the purity drops to 91%. But the vital signs remain stable. The protagonist tells him to add another 160 grams of white mercury to the culture tank to stabilize the subject's primary personality. As soon as the mercury is added, the purity drops to 85%, but the vital signs remain stable. The next step is to add 366 grams of yellow salt to the culture tank to reshape the soul. After it is added, the purity drops to 72%, but the heartbeat remains normal. Now only the final step remains. They must drain the residual fluid from the culture tank and depressurize it before opening it. His assistant closes the safety valve and opens the tank. Isao excitedly gazes at the final calamity's physical form, for it is his greatest creation, a biochemical experiment capable of destroying the entire world. The so-called final calamity is finally complete, and with its terrifying form, his new creation will be able to take its first steps toward conquering everything in its master's name. However, his creation looks somewhat different from what he had imagined. The protagonist is surprised and thinks he needs to examine it more closely. His assistant tries to stop him, as direct contact with the test subject's body is not permitted under the biochemical safety protocol. Isao tells his assistant to talk less and continues approaching his creation, thinking that perhaps the female form is merely a disguise used by the final calamity. If that is truly the case, then those little things might simply be places where the final calamity stores its energy, so he needs to test them. As soon as he touches them, their softness makes him realize that she is nothing more than an ordinary human. He continues examining her and tries to understand what happened to the left arm of the angel of extinction that he implanted, where the sorrowful eyes of the Emerald Empress that he inserted have gone, and why he cannot hear the sound of blood being pumped by the perpetual mechanical heart, the enhanced Type 1 inextinguishable heart that he transplanted. Cheese notices that the test subject has awakened and shouts for his boss to be careful, but she ends up falling on top of the protagonist. With tears in his eyes, the assistant promises his boss that he will inherit the family's legacy, so he should not worry. He also says that he has already prepared his master's tombstone, bearing the words "current head of the family, chairman of the Pure Research Society," the genius alchemist who was not killed by the city's heroes, but died at the hands of his own creation and a pitiful 15-year-old virgin. Isao yells at his filthy rat to be quiet or he will put worm eggs in his cheese storage. Cheese is surprised, as the liquid that splattered was the blood of an experimental mutant fire slug, and asks whether his boss is unharmed. The protagonist, however, asks how the greatest alchemist of that century could possibly be killed by his own test subject. During her creation, he had told his assistant to add his manifested liquid soul extract to the final calamity's culture fluid, so that her soul would naturally possess an affinity with his, and she would therefore never be able to harm him. Cheese pauses to think about what his boss has just said, as he does not remember hearing that request. He only remembers that his boss found him drinking and told him to stop because the proportion of yellow salt was incorrect and needed to be recalibrated. Since he needed help, he asked his assistant to add that yellow liquid to the final calamity's culture fluid, taking care not to spill it. However, Cheese opened the container to find out what it was, and noticed that it had a very pleasant aroma. He then thought that adding the liquid to his wine might improve its flavor. He realizes that he has made a colossal mistake and that everything may now be ruined. Isao tells the final calamity to get off him and behave, as he is her master. The girl, however, merely stares at him for a while and slowly begins moving closer. The protagonist becomes confused and asks what she is doing. The girl gently strokes her master, making him somewhat frightened. The protagonist pushes her back and starts shouting that he has been exposed, demanding the purification spray. They lock her once again behind a high-frequency luminescent crystal wall with exceptionally high resistance to impact, corrosion and magic. In addition, its permeability can be adjusted freely. He sprays himself, believing he has been contaminated, but suddenly remembers something and begins searching for it. His assistant tries to understand what is happening and asks what he is looking for. Isao finally finds a file and concludes that the woman must be the Final Calamity's original template, Human 2252. Cheese asks whether she is not the same woman they rescued 1 year earlier, the girl who had no arms or legs and was nearly dead, which explains why he thought the Calamity looked somewhat familiar. However, he clearly remembers that the woman had purple hair and does not understand why the test subject has blonde hair. The protagonist says that this is a problem and that her personality has apparently changed as well. Sometime earlier, at the White Queen Bank in Golden City, a bomb had been planted and as soon as the timer ran out, it began releasing gas. Meanwhile, in the restroom, the protagonist and his assistant remark that the dragon spider toxin should have been released by then. They take their weapons as it is time to begin. As soon as they enter the bank, they find everyone lying unconscious, but one of the guards is still awake and asks how the two of them dare to rob that bank as they clearly have no idea who owns it. The protagonist, however, neutralizes the guard as he has no interest whatsoever in listening to him. The shot transforms the guard into a kind of slime. Cheese looks at a woman and a child, terrified. The woman tells them they can take whatever they want, but there is no need to hurt them. The assistant tells the boy that he is his favorite and takes his lollipop because it is strawberry milk flavored exactly the way he likes it. They close the bank doors and begin carrying out their true plan. A short while later, they manage to reach the vault and later that night, they celebrate while surrounded by money. The robbery had been perfect and Golden City's most wicked criminal genius, the alchemist ISO, were the best words to describe him. His assistant suggests that the two of them go to the Black Lion bar to meet some girls and celebrate with plenty of drinks. The protagonist, however, rejects the idea because the last time they went there, 1/4 of the money they had stolen was spent on alcohol and tips for those girls. This time, every last cent must be devoted to the Final Calamity experiment. Once they successfully create the Final Calamity, Golden City will become their playground. Then they will be able to reveal their true identities. When that moment comes, they will be able to do whatever they want and no one will be capable of stopping them. The two of them say, at the same time, that they will force the mayor to personally serve them, and make all the city's heroes wear diapers and suck on pacifiers while dancing for them. Suddenly, they hear a gunshot and duck, wondering who fired it as the security inspection department may be pursuing them. The protagonist, however, dismisses that possibility because the shot does not sound as though it came from a standard security inspection department firearm. It sounds more like a large caliber revolver. The shooter belongs to the Golden City Security Inspection Department. He is the director of the Light District branch and a city hero known as Noble Bullet. Named Homiurka, the purple-haired woman who was missing one arm and one leg was fighting for her life. Cheese becomes irritated when he sees the situation because that filthy old man, instead of chasing the people who just robbed the bank in his district, is pursuing that poor woman. The protagonist, however, merely tells him to be quiet so they can hear what is happening below. Homiurka looks at the woman and says that this is exactly what he would expect from a member of the Hellhound unit. Even after enduring so many experiments, she managed to eliminate 5 of his elite detectives, but now she can do nothing but crawl like a dog. He orders her to reveal immediately where she has hidden the Hellhound unit's assassination list and says that if she cooperates, he may spare her life since he is a knight. The girl, however, remains silent and trembling. Homiurka begins to laugh as he had forgotten that, to prevent the unit's operational secrets from being leaked, all its members had their vocal cords removed and can communicate only through a special sign language. To him, they are a pathetic group. Even though she knows her life is hanging by a thread, the woman uses her remaining arm to attempt a counterattack, but Homiurka notices the movement and shoots her hand, asking how she can still think about fighting back in a situation like that. Suddenly, a teddy bear falls to the ground. Homiurka had already suspected that she still had the list, and when he sees the bear, he picks it up and asks what she is hiding inside the stuffed toy. The girl tries to stop him, but he strikes her and begins punishing her, as the teddy bear is apparently very important to her. If that is the case, then he will return it to her. He throws the bear onto the ground, but then shoots the toy, destroying it. Homiurka thinks that it is fine, because even if he cannot obtain the list, bringing back her body will still earn him a reward from those superiors, though a slightly smaller one. Suddenly, the protagonist begins clapping, because no one would ever imagine that Golden City's criminal nemesis, the great hero known as Noble Bullet and director Homiurka, is actually a man obsessed with money. Homiurka points his weapon at the protagonist and asks who he is. Isao asks for a moment to introduce himself, because the person standing before him is Golden City's most wicked criminal and the greatest alchemist of all time, Baron Isao. The protagonist apologizes, as he had forgotten to introduce his right-hand man, Dr. Mad Rat. Chi says he would like to correct one thing. He is not actually the right-hand man, but his partner in crime, because the two of them are equals. They begin arguing about it, but Homiurka points out that he has no time for childish games, and that if they keep interfering with his work, they may never see their mothers again. Isao tells his companion that the old man is underestimating them, and that they need to show him what they are capable of. They then throw the 2 bags full of money onto the ground. Homiurka realizes that they were responsible for robbing the bank. Isao and Cheese begin laughing, but Homiurka says that boasting about one's own crimes to satisfy a distorted psychological need for achievement is a sign of inner insecurity and low self-esteem. Criminals who do that are usually low-level novices. He points his weapon at them and says that he does not like eliminating novices or trash, because every bullet in his gun is extremely expensive, but that he will make an exception for the 2 of them that day. Since he is a knight, he will give them 3 seconds to run. Isao says that there is no need for such courtesy and asks him to fire, because he would like to witness the elegant shot of Noble Bullet, Golden City's #1 marksman. Homiurka is flattered by the praise and, because of that, decides to grant his opponents that pleasure. However, when he tries to pull the trigger, he realizes that he cannot. His head begins to feel strange, and he feels the weapon growing heavier and heavier. As soon as he looks at the money, he realizes that there was something inside the bags. Isao tells him that, unfortunately, he noticed too late. The muscle cell nerve interference gas is present at a concentration of 300 parts per million. Humans begin to suffer poisoning after approximately 8 seconds of exposure, and Homiurka inhaled it for more than an entire minute. Still confused, Homiurka asks what the 2 of them want and whether they intend to save the woman, but the protagonist tells him to stop joking because they are villains. Therefore, how could they possibly do something as heroic as saving someone? The truth is that they simply do not like the city's heroes. Isao transforms the old man into a slime, which runs away in complete terror. Cheese is disappointed because even those who possess silver hero licenses are nothing special. Now it is time to clean up the crime scene and get back to the fun. But when he looks at the protagonist, he notices that Isao is standing beside the woman and asks what he intends to do. Isao says that he is merely observing how much longer the woman can survive. Her left arm and left leg were severed a long time ago. As the wounds have already begun to rot, the palm of her right hand was pierced by a bullet. Nearly all her ribs are broken. Her right eye has been destroyed, and all the nails have been torn from her fingers. Her vocal cords were deliberately burned. Her heart rate is irregular, and she is already showing signs of heart failure. Finally, he detected 4 powerful toxins in her bloodstream. Therefore, it is a miracle that she has survived for so long. This makes him curious to discover what is so special about the woman that she was treated in such a way, because the security inspection department would not use such cruel methods against an ordinary person. Still confused, Cheese points out that the woman will not survive much longer and asks why they should concern themselves with it. They can simply ignore everything and return to the party, which is the most important thing at that moment. However, he realizes that the protagonist is not listening and shouts, asking whether he is truly thinking about saving the woman. Isao emphasizes that he has already made it clear that he is a villain, the most wicked villain in Golden City, and therefore, he will not save anyone. Asking such a question is practically an insult. For a moment, Cheese becomes frightened, thinking that his partner truly intended to save her, but the protagonist tells him to stop talking nonsense, because they need to leave. As they walk away from her, the protagonist notices that the woman continues struggling to move, even after suffering all those injuries. However, he decides to ignore her, because many people rot away in unknown alleys throughout that city every day, and it has nothing to do with him. Suddenly, a violent storm begins. The heavy rain will wash away every trace and all the blood from the city, and once it passes, everything will be forgotten. However, the girl, despite there being no explanation for why she is still alive, continues crawling while staring at the remains of the teddy bear. She advances inch by inch until she manages to embrace them. As soon as she gathers all the pieces, she accepts her fate, closes her eyes, and finally finds peace. However, at that exact moment, the protagonist returns and stands there, watching her. In the nightmare nest, inside the operating room, Cheese asks whether Iseo truly understands what they are doing. The protagonist replies that it is merely surgery, but Mad Rat shouts that they have just saved a life. He asks when the protagonist develops such a bad habit of saving people, and wonders whether he has forgotten their true objective. Iseo says that his objective remains unchanged. They will become the most wicked villains and make the world witness the terror and greatness of the Pursued family. However, to accomplish that, they need to create a biological weapon powerful enough to destroy the world, the final calamity which will surpass even the gods. The host of the final calamity must possess every extreme negative emotion: pain, sorrow, anger, and despair. Most importantly, however, there must be a trace of the purest kindness deep within her soul. That final trace of kindness is the key to making the final calamity controllable. The previous experiments failed thousands of times because the experimental hosts lacked that final piece. But that woman fulfills every condition. Still doubtful, Cheese points out the girl is so badly injured that she could die at any moment. The protagonist says that if that is the case, they must immediately conduct the final calamity experiment. They need to divide the work. Cheese will be responsible for preparing the transplant materials, while Iseo will prepare the blood of the cocoon of despair. Mad Rat quickly retrieves the left arm of the Angel of Extinction, the sorrowful eye of the Emerald Empress, the modified model of the inextinguishable artificial heart, and finally the corrupted fetal blood of the cocoon of despair. With everything gathered, the protagonist prepares himself because it is time for them to begin creating a true miracle. Back in the present, the protagonist observes the result of his experiment, while his assistant asks what they will do now. Iseo explains that the following morning, they will begin the routine of observation, cultivation, and testing. Cheese asks what will happen if the girl turns out to be a failure, but without a moment's hesitation, the protagonist says that they can simply dispose of her because he has no need to keep a failure by his side. In his room, Iseo lies in bed trying to sleep, but he remembers what happened. He gets up, wondering why he cannot fall asleep. Still lost in thought, he decides to check on the situation because although the specially reinforced white crystal walls of Culture Tank 1 possess incredible resistance to impact and corrosion, it is better to take a look just to be safe. As soon as he observes the girl, he notices that she is behaving well and concludes that he can relax. But when he looks more closely, he sees that she is trembling. Iseo cannot believe that the mighty final calamity is afraid of sleeping alone at night. He tries to leave, thinking that she is inside his base, the Level 7 Nightmare Nest, more specifically in the observation area for high-risk experimental subjects. Suddenly, however, his legs freeze. He remembers exactly what happened and decides to open the tank again, telling her to come out because he will take her somewhere slightly better where she can sleep. As they walk, they pass high-risk experimental subject number 8, the Savage Dragon, who shouts that once he gets out of there, he will swallow the protagonist whole. They also pass the Abyssal Eye, high-risk experimental subject number 15, who promises to pursue the protagonist's soul no matter what happens. Iseo places the girl between the two creatures and points out that of all his experiments, those two are the most cheerful. Therefore, if she stays between them, she will not be afraid to spend the night alone. But the girl remains somewhat frightened by the situation. As he leaves, he tells everyone to behave because he is going back to sleep. As soon as he returns to his room, he throws himself onto the bed because now, the final calamity will no longer feel lonely and he can finally rest properly. The Savage Dragon calls out to the Abyssal Eye and says that this is the detention zone for high-risk subjects. So he does not understand what that little human girl has to do with powerful creatures like them. The Abyssal Eye does not know what is happening either, but remembers that the protagonist said the girl was the final calamity. The Savage Dragon begins laughing because there is no way such an insignificant little girl who looks like an ant could be the final calamity. The Abyssal Eye also mocks the situation, saying that the protagonist's experiments have failed miserably. At least in the past, he was able to create terrifying creatures, but this time he produced nothing more than a weak human, which is hilarious. The final calamity becomes distressed when she realizes that she's being ridiculed and tries to get out. The Savage Dragon attempts to calm her down, telling her not to struggle so much, because that high-frequency white crystal wall was created by the protagonist himself, and not even he can break through it while in his berserker form. If she manages to break it, he promises to become her mount. The Abyssal Eye says the same thing, because not even his most powerful magical energy beam managed to scratch the wall. Therefore, how could she, a mere weak human, Possibly do anything? If she succeeds in breaking it, he promises to gladly become her pet. Still desperate, the final calamity feels something growing inside her chest. Her left arm transforms and she shatters the crystal with ease. Somewhat confused and unsure of what truly happened, she simply stares at her own hand. The two creatures who had previously mocked the situation are astonished. The great savage dragon bows and begs his elder sister to accept his reverence, promising to become her horse and pleading with her to help him escape from that place. The Abyssal Eye also promises to keep his word and asks her to free him. While Azah and Cheese are sleeping, the alarm goes off. The two leap to their feet, and Cheese asks what is happening and why the alarm in the high-risk detention zone is sounding. Moreover, it is a level 4 alarm. This means that at least 3 white crystal walls in the cells of the high-risk experimental subjects have been completely destroyed, and that the experiments are out of control. They must suppress them before they cause further damage. The two head there as quickly as possible. Cheese checks the report and says that the escaped subjects are number 8, the Savage Dragon, and number 15, the Abyssal Eye, both from the isolation room. However, cell F203 was also damaged. Even though he does not remember them placing anyone in that cell, Azah is surprised and asks to see it. As soon as he looks, he is pleased to discover that the girl has managed to manifest the left arm. Cheese becomes irritated and demands that the protagonist explain how the final calamity was transferred to the observation area for high-risk subjects. As soon as they enter the area, they realize that everything is in chaos. The protagonist says that this is enough and that the two of them must have had plenty of fun already. As soon as he sees the protagonist, the savage dragon shouts that he has been trapped like a laboratory rat for far too long and that he will now show him what he is capable of. There will be consequences to pay. Cheese, however, fires a gas into the dragon's face, causing him to panic and ask what it is. The protagonist explains that it is a grenade containing more than 200 dragon spider eggs. Since he is a dragon, he should already know what dragon spiders are. The savage dragon becomes terrified because those spiders are parasites that live inside dragons and subdragons, feeding on draconic species. Once infected, the host is doomed. Isao congratulates him, saying that he is very intelligent. The Abyssal Eye thinks that while the protagonist's attention is focused on that idiotic savage dragon, he can use his magical energy beam to destroy him. Isao, however, has not lowered his guard for even a single second. He throws a flash grenade, leaving the Abyssal Eye completely blind. With the situation under control, the protagonist asks what they would prefer, to continue fooling around or return to their cages. The savage dragon asks whether he truly thinks that is enough to make them surrender because they still have their elder sister beside them. The Abyssal Eye points out that she can instantly melt even the strongest reinforced crystal walls, so Isao will not stand the slightest chance against her. Isao is surprised when he hears them call her their elder sister. The two move aside, and the final calamity begins walking toward the protagonist. Isao becomes worried because she truly is the final calamity, and if she loses control, the situation could become extremely troublesome. The savage dragon begins laughing because it has been a very long time since he last saw the protagonist show even the slightest sign of fear. He tries to move the calamity by telling her that the protagonist imprisoned them, turned noble creatures into laboratory rats, and conducted experiments on both of them. That was a great humiliation, so she must avenge them. The calamity continues walking without saying a single word. Frightened, Cheese asks whether Isao has any emergency protocol capable of containing the final calamity's power. The protagonist points out that, theoretically, no material or method exists that can completely suppress the final calamity. She quickens her pace and suddenly leaps toward the protagonist, landing on top of him. The savage dragon laughs and says that it is still not too late for them to beg for mercy because if they are obedient and help remove those dragon spider eggs, he may ask his elder sister to spare their lives. However, if they take too long, his elder sister will end up killing both of them. When he looks again, however, he realizes that the great and powerful elder sister is merely affectionately nuzzling Isao. The protagonist holds her face, says that he is trying to speak, and asks whether she is finished. The calamity merely smiles and continues staring at him. Isao understands what she is trying to say because, apparently, she does not want to sleep in that place either. He promises to find somewhere else for her, but asks her to stop trying to lick him because she is not a dog. The savage dragon and the Abyssal Eye try to convince their elder sister to use the same attack that melted the crystal wall. The protagonist, however, glares at them and says that now that they have incited the final calamity to destroy the isolation room and disturbed his sleep, he must find a suitable way to thank them. A short while later, they're inside the elevator, and the calamity tries to figure out how it works. Isao and Cheese, however, are exhausted and tell her to stop pressing every button. Meanwhile, the savage dragon is restrained in a strange position. He shouts that he is a noble dragon and that even if he must wear a confinement and reflection suit, they should not put it on him in such a ridiculous manner because he does not know how he will ever show his face again in the high-risk experimental subject area. In the abyssal eyes cell, onions are scattered everywhere and he screams that his eyes are burning. A short while later elsewhere, several nine-headed hydra hatchlings are swimming in the water, and the Calamity happily observes everything. Isao says that the issue now is that the final Calamity refuses to sleep in the laboratory, and does not want to sleep in the observation area for high-risk experimental subjects either. Therefore, they need to decide where she will sleep. Cheese thinks the problem is very easy to solve. She can simply sleep in the same room as the protagonist. Isao refuses and asks how he could possibly allow an experimental subject to sleep in the same room as him. He then asks why she cannot stay in Mad Rat's room. Cheese explains that the current situation is that the Calamity only feels comfortable when she is near the protagonist. If he forces her to sleep somewhere else, she may cause more trouble. Therefore, it is safer to keep her by his side. Isao eventually agrees because he added his soul extract while the girl was being cultivated, so it is only natural for her to possess a strong affinity for him. Cheese says that there is one small problem. He did not place the bottle of soul extract he had been given into the girl's culture tank, but instead drank its contents with his wine. The protagonist becomes furious and asks what he just said, but the assistant claims that it was not his fault since Isao insisted on giving him orders while he was drunk. He knows very well that liquid soul extract has a fragrance similar to wine, so in his confused state, Cheese simply assumed it was a drink. Isao continues arguing with his assistant, calling him a colossal idiot because they now have no final safeguard for controlling the final Calamity, and if she becomes enraged, they will all be doomed. Cheese asks him to stop arguing and look behind him. Suddenly, the Calamity jumps into the aquarium to get a closer look at the fish and becomes completely soaked. Isao orders the Calamity to get out of Ju's tank immediately because it is not a toy, but she continues ignoring him. The protagonist becomes irritated, asks whether she did not hear his order, and tells her to get out immediately, yet she continues playing in the water. He loses his patience and begins pulling her out, but a small accident occurs and she falls on top of him once again. Isao tells her to get up because he cannot breathe, while his assistant laughs uncontrollably at the scene. Isao says that he is her master and gives her an order. She is never allowed to enter Ju's tank again. Cheese decides that the matter is settled and points out that the Calamity is Isao's responsibility, so he is going back to sleep. The protagonist becomes irritated and asks whether he truly intends to sleep and leave him to deal with the Calamity alone. Cheese says that he will give him some excellent advice. The Calamity girl is merely a delicate young woman, so he needs to be a little gentler because if she becomes angry, the consequences could be unimaginable. Isao thinks that she is far from being a delicate girl since she is merely an experiment, but suddenly the Calamity sneezes and looks even more pitiful. Isao takes a deep breath and thinks that she is filthy and soaking wet, so she needs a bath. He takes her to the bathroom and begins heating the water. Isao holds her arm and uses one of his devices on her, causing her to feel slightly ticklish. He has already examined her 3 times, and apparently there are no pathogens in her body. Even so, he does not want an experimental subject using his private bathtub. However, it seems there is no other choice. He tells her that once he leaves the bathroom, she may enter the bathtub and bathe, but apparently she does not understand anything he says. He tries to explain more patiently, telling her that once he leaves, she should remove her clothes and get into the bathtub to wash herself, and asks whether she understands now. The girl smiles and nods, indicating that she does, but begins removing her clothes before he can leave the bathroom. The protagonist covers his eyes slightly embarrassed, but begins wondering why he is behaving that way, because in the eyes of a great alchemist, experimental subjects have no gender, and he should view the situation objectively. However, when he looks at his great masterpiece, he is unable to control himself and ends up losing consciousness. A few minutes later, he recovers and begins helping her bathe very carefully, washing her hair because she does not know how to do any of it by herself. As he lathers her hair, he tells her not to move or open her eyes, because if the shampoo gets into them, she could go blind, and he will not take responsibility. After washing her hair for a while, he asks her to tilt her head slightly backward and keep her eyes closed so that the water does not enter them. As he does this, he thinks that he must admit the carbon-based biological structure of his creation is quite fascinating. After finishing the bath, he hands her a towel and says that he is not her servant, so she can dry herself. Even though she is the final Calamity girl, he will not take care of her forever. However, he accidentally steps on the soap and falls into the bathtub with her. He complains that it hurt a little because he hit his head, and thinks that perhaps it would have been better to take her directly to the sterilization room and blast her with a high-pressure water gun. The Calamity stares at him and moves slightly closer, making him even more embarrassed. At that exact moment, Cheese opens the bathroom door and says that he found a shock collar in case the protagonist is still worried that the Calamity might attack him. Upon seeing the scene, he simply closes the door, concluding that he had been worrying for nothing. Suddenly, he opens it once again and says that if his master is truly thinking about doing that sort of thing with a high-risk experiment, he should wear a protective suit against bodily fluids just to be safe. Isao orders him to leave immediately. Outside, Mad Rat thinks that this is truly impressive because although his master possesses unparalleled alchemical abilities, he is still merely a young virgin. He looks at a picture of his mistress and thinks that she can rest assured because the young master's preferences are perfectly normal. Back in the bathroom, the protagonist, still irritated, begins helping his creation get ready. As soon as he picks up the hairdryer to help dry her hair more quickly, she sees its reflection in the mirror and has a vague memory of what happened at the end of her life. Isao tells her to stay still because he is going to dry her hair, but when he looks ahead, he realizes that she is no longer there and asks where she went. Looking to the side, he notices that she is hiding behind the curtain and becomes slightly confused. As soon as he opens the curtain, he tells her to stop playing because it is already very late, but the Calamity is trembling with fear. Isao tries to understand whether he did something to frighten her because she was not afraid of the savage dragon or even the abyssal eye. Suddenly, he remembers the hairdryer. Since the device is shaped like a firearm, it probably reminded her of the night when Noble Bullet hunted her. Apparently, her brain still retains fragments of her personality and memories from before the experiment, which makes the situation somewhat more troublesome than usual. The protagonist calls her over and shows her the hairdryer, frightening her even more, but then decides to turn it on. She does not even open her eyes, but when she realizes that he is merely using the device normally, she relaxes again and begins using it by herself. However, she spends 20 minutes playing with the hairdryer, and Isao thinks that if he had known this would happen, it would have been better to let her remain afraid of it. He loses his patience and takes the hairdryer from her hands, because he did not go through all that effort to create the final Calamity, just to watch her play until late at night. She tries to persuade him to let her play a little longer, but the protagonist puts the hairdryer away, saying that acting cute will not work on him. After putting it away, he locks the drawer and says that if she behaves well, he will allow her to play with the device again in the future. But for now, she must go to sleep immediately. Inside the bedroom, the protagonist already has a headache because the real problem has yet to be resolved. Where will the girl sleep that night? While he thinks about how to handle the matter, the Calamity is already yawning sleepily. He believes that first of all, she cannot sleep in his bed as it is strictly forbidden to experimental subjects, and that is an unbreakable rule for an alchemist. However, she simply runs past him and begins sleeping like a baby in his bed. He starts pulling her away because she has already broken the rule and no one told her that she could sleep there. Isao sits her on the floor and explains that as an experimental subject, she is not allowed to climb onto his bed. As punishment, she will sleep on the floor without permission to move, make noise, or sneak into the bathroom to play with the hairdryer. With everything settled, he turns off the bedroom light and thinks that he will finally be able to sleep in peace. Even so, he thinks it is somewhat dangerous to leave the girl in his room because although she has shown no hostility toward him, she could still become enraged and end up destroying everything. When he looks at her, he sees that she is sleeping peacefully on the floor and concludes that the chances of that happening are extremely low. Therefore, perhaps he really can sleep. Before he can fall asleep, however, he begins hearing noises and asks what she is doing, telling her to remain quiet and sleep. The noise stops for a moment but soon begins again. He gets up irritably, asking why she is moving around so much, but when he looks again, he realizes that she is trembling as though she were cold. Concerned, Isao goes to Cheese's room where his assistant had been looking through some interesting magazines before going to sleep and tries to wake him, but Cheese merely turns over and continues sleeping. Isao has a brilliant idea. He takes a stink bug and places it near Cheese's nose, causing him to wake up feeling sick while spraying something to eliminate the terrible smell. Cheese shouts at the protagonist and asks what is wrong with him, but Isao points out that it is the stupid rat's fault because he was the one who made the Calamity girl sleep in his room in the first place. Cheese asks whether his master truly thought making him stink with that insect would be suitable repayment. Isao explains that he actually came there to find out whether his companion had an extra blanket. Cheese begins laughing and asks whether it is for the girl because the protagonist is constantly complaining about her, but is still a young virgin who is sincerely trying to take care of her. Isao tells him to stop talking so much nonsense because the following day he will need to conduct several physical and combat tests on her. Until he gathers all the information about her immunity, he must keep her physical condition stable and eliminate any external pathogens that could interfere with the results. Cheese changes the subject and asks why the protagonist wants to borrow a blanket when he owns 6 sets of bedding and could simply reserve one for her. Isao makes it very clear that this will not happen because every set of bedding was meticulously planned. Monday and Sunday are the cyclical days of the week, so he uses the Ouroboros set which symbolizes infinite cycles. Tuesday and Wednesday are dedicated to advancing his research, so he uses the set covered in alchemical symbols which places him in the proper mental state to swim through a sea of alchemical knowledge. Thursday is the day for purifying Azoth, the elixir of life. Since purified Azoth is purple, he uses his entirely purple set. More importantly, purple was his mother's favorite color. Friday is the day for watching his favorite television program, Criminal Art, when he uses his officially licensed Jack of Hearts bedding. Finally, there is Saturday. Cheese tries to interrupt him, saying that he already knows the entire story. He uses Saturday to motivate himself to create the ultimate biological weapon, the Calamity Girl, because he had her projected form printed on a blanket. The protagonist says that this is exactly right and that for all those reasons, he has no spare blanket to lend her. Cheese thinks that his young master is completely insane. Even so, he remains calm because the girl is the Calamity Girl. Therefore, there should be no problem with her using a blanket bearing her own image. Isao is surprised because the logic is flawless. However, he explains that technically, she has not yet passed all the required tests and therefore does not even qualify as the Calamity Girl. Dr. Rat does not care what his young master wishes to call her, but makes it very clear that he has only one blanket and will not lend it to him. Isao does not understand why a rat needs a blanket, but since there is no other option, he goes to the closet and opens the Saturday bedding set. As he prepares her bed, he points out that the blanket is a gift from a very benevolent master, but she must treat it carefully. She cannot drool on it, wrinkle it, or under any circumstances, roll it into a tube. This time, the Calamity lies down more comfortably. Even so, the protagonist thinks that, just to be safe, he should probably place a riot control collar on the girl, but his brain is completely exhausted at that moment and he needs to rest. He finally manages to fall asleep. At that moment, the Calamity gets out of her bed and stands beside him. In the morning, the alarm clock begins ringing and the crow shouts for the greatest alchemist of the century to wake up. Isao opens his eyes and grumpily thinks that he forgot to turn off the alarm the previous night. It is the girl's fault because he was unable to get his full 8 hours of sleep. Suddenly, he notices a hand resting on his chest and feels soft breathing beside his ear. When he looks to the side, the protagonist is surprised and tries to understand when she climbed into bed beside him. He continues watching her for a brief moment and realizes that she does not possess even a trace of the characteristics that the Calamity was supposed to have. At that exact moment, Cheese throws the door open and asks his master how he slept the previous night. Isao gets up as quickly as possible and tries to hide the Calamity, but his assistant asks where she is, and the protagonist replies that he does not know. Cheese panics and asks whether he is playing some kind of joke because if the Calamity entered the high-risk experimental subject zones or the experimentation area, it could cause an enormous problem. They need to find her immediately, and he suggests checking the cameras. Isao tells him to go to the monitoring room and says that he will follow shortly. Cheese agrees, but before leaving the room, he notices that something is wrong and points toward the bed, saying that the blanket is moving. Still trying to hide what is happening, Isao asks whether his companion needs glasses because a blanket could not possibly move by itself. Suddenly, the girl emerges from beneath the covers, overheated. Isao merely explains that she climbed into his bed by herself during the night. Cheese tries to be understanding, saying that they have a brotherly relationship, and that the protagonist did not need to hide it, because he fully understands that a teenager going through puberty has certain needs, and there is nothing shameful about that. Little Isao is finally growing up. The protagonist, however, merely sprays something into his older brother's face, causing Cheese to roll across the floor and nearly become sick because Isao used a 300% concentrated stink bug gland extract, a weapon developed to deal with the city's heroes. Isao explains once again that he already said the Calamity climbed into his bed by herself, So Cheese needs to stop talking so much nonsense. Now they must prepare to begin all her tests. They go to the experimental testing zone, specifically the physical data collection room. Cheese begins taking her measurements and discovers that she is 1 meter and 71 centimeters tall. Dr. Rat mocks him again because the Calamity Girl is 11 centimeters taller than the protagonist. Therefore, if he wanted to kiss her, he would have to stand on his tiptoes. Isao points out that he is still growing and that he does not want to kiss her. The second physical test is the weight measurement. She currently weighs 64 kilograms. The protagonist considers that far too little because the left arm of the Angel of Ashes alone weighs much more than 64 kilograms. Combined with the high destiny fetal blood of the Cocoon of Despair that was injected into her, her weight should be at least 800 kilograms. Cheese needs to take the most important measurement, her bust. He is impressed to discover that she wears a size 36D and thinks it is perfect. Isao becomes slightly irritated and tells him to stop measuring irrelevant things. They move on to the next test, which measures lung capacity. Isao explains that she must first inhale as deeply as possible and then blow into the tube with all her strength. The Calamity becomes excited and says that she understands. The protagonist tells her that it is her turn. She inhales as much air as she can and holds her breath for a while. The protagonist becomes concerned, asks what she is waiting for and tells her to blow into the tube, but she simply holds his face and kisses him. At that exact moment, as usual, Cheese enters the room, asking how the lung capacity test went, and encounters a somewhat unusual scene. Although he is already beginning to grow accustomed to situations like that, the Calamity proudly looks at the meter believing that she performed the task perfectly, but when she notices that it did not move she becomes slightly upset. Isao goes to the bathroom to wash his mouth while his assistant continues laughing, as he nearly died from laughing so hard after seeing him get kissed by his own experimental subject. He is probably the first member of the family to receive such a great honor. Isao tells him to stop fooling around, but Cheese continues mocking the situation. The protagonist splashes water on him because he has been talking far too much lately. Isao puts on a protective mask, but Dr. Rat points out that he has already examined the girl more than 10 times and that she carries no pathogens, so there is no need for him to wear it. The protagonist, however, is already losing his patience and says that his assistant will handle the remaining tests. The next one is the sit and reach test. She reaches 8 centimeters and falls within the level D flexibility classification, which is normal for humans. In the 50-meter sprint she completes the course in 6.2 seconds, which is also normal for humans. In the single-handed grip strength test she reaches 51 kilograms, another result considered normal. After analyzing the results, the protagonist concludes that based on those scores and physical statistics she is no different from an ordinary human. Cheese thinks that perhaps the Calamity has not yet entered combat mode. Besides, those are only basic tests. What truly matters are the tests of her attack methods, intensity, aggression, resistance, and durability. Isao concludes that they need to place her into combat mode immediately. Cheese looks at her as she plays with the objects in the room and asks whether he already knows how to do that. Isao explains that it is very simple, they only need to find the most bloodthirsty experimental subject they have and lock the two of them inside a room together. Cheese is surprised and asked whether the protagonist intends to use ultra-high-risk subject number 0 as her test opponent. Perhaps they should take a gradual approach, slowly increasing the strength of her adversaries. They could begin with the weakest low-risk experimental creature, a prairie rabbit. Isao thinks that if they are talking about the weakest subjects, perhaps they should use the laboratory mice. Cheese snatches the mouse from the young master's hands and says that he has already warned him that he will not allow any kind of rodent to be used in the experiments. The protagonist laughs and says that although they are both rodents they do not belong to the same species, since Cheese is a sewer rat. He then looks at the rabbit and asks whether it can truly awaken the Calamity's fighting instincts. Before he can finish speaking, however, the girl picks up the rabbit and begins doing something with it. Dr. Rat asks who said that a low-risk creature could not awaken her fighting instincts. Isao is surprised because even an adorable rabbit appears capable of awakening her desire to kill. He becomes frightened merely imagining what she would do in a crowded area, and the more he thinks about it the more excited he becomes. However, she's not displaying her fighting instinct but rather her instinct for cuteness. The two of them are disappointed, but Isao injects something into the rabbit. His assistant becomes curious and asks what he injected into the animal. Isao explains that it was the newly upgraded Frenzied Evolution number 6, whose transformation speed has been increased 29-fold. Suddenly, the cute rabbit begins transforming into an enormous monster. To awaken her combat instincts her opponent must at least be at an acceptable level. For the time being they can call the creature Super Savage Rabbit Beast number 1. The rabbit begins displaying its strength and Isao grows increasingly excited by the situation. Cheese however thinks that the young master is merely an idiot obsessed with alchemy who truly does not know how to show mercy. The rabbit charges at the Calamity, and Cheese uses the opportunity to suggest a bet whether the Calamity girl will dodge or face the attack head-on. Whoever loses will have to clean the base that week. The rat bets that she will dodge while the protagonist believes that she will confront the attack directly. As soon as the rabbit strikes, she simply disappears, leaving everyone astonished. Suddenly, she appears amid the savage rabbit's fur as though she were playing, knocks it down and begins petting it. Cheese concludes that the girl possesses no desire to fight whatsoever. The two enter the elevator, and Cheese says that even if her combat instinct is extremely weak, it can still be developed over time. Therefore, Isao should not place her against ultra-high-risk subject number 0, because what will they do if she dies now? Isao points out that if she dies it will prove that she is merely a failure and failures have no value beyond increasing the success rate of the next experiment. Finally, they arrive at subject number 0's containment chamber and put on their masks. Before they open the door, Cheese points out that it is still not too late to give up, because they invested their finest transplants in that girl, and if something goes wrong, they could lose everything. He knows very well that because of number 0's personality she will undoubtedly attack the girl with all her strength. Isao hopes that she does, because if the Calamity does not experience the nearness of death at least once, she will never be able to transform into the true final Calamity. They have already failed many times and he is growing tired. At that moment, she touches his head and tries to comfort him, but the protagonist grabs her hand because experimental subjects have no right to pity their creators. He changes his tone and tells her to listen very carefully. If she does not unleash the full power of the Calamity to fight number 0, she will be killed. She was created for a single purpose: to become the most powerful biological weapon and help him conquer the entire world. Cheese thinks it is a tremendous waste to use such a beautiful girl in combat, but the protagonist merely tells him to be quiet. Once inside the containment area, the protagonist asks his assistant to bring in the final Calamity, but Cheese had turned his back for only a second, and she had already entered while clinging to her creator. As soon as number 0 sees the scene, she flies into a rage and shouts at the blonde girl to take her filthy hands off Isao. The Calamity becomes slightly frightened. The protagonist asks whether she sees that woman because she was also part of the final Calamity experiment. She was number 0 and had been his most powerful experiment up to that point. He tells Lucille that if she wishes to claim the title of strongest experimental subject, she must defeat her opponent and prove it to him. Lucille becomes furious enough to bite her own lips, but soon begins smiling and says that if she wins she wants him to spend the entire day with her. The protagonist agrees to the proposal. Lucille tries to gain even more and asks whether she can hold him while they sleep, but the protagonist tells her not to push her luck. Lucille says that he does not need to worry because she will make sure to completely destroy his new experiment since Isao can belong only to her. Isao says that if that is true, Lucille must give it everything she has, and when the time comes they will see what happens. Outside, the protagonist once again emphasizes to the Calamity that if she does not fight seriously this time she will die. If that happens it will prove that she is nothing more than a failure. Furthermore, he will not interfere in the fight to save her. The confrontation will be decided solely between the two of them. He releases the rope, tells her that she had better take care of herself, and closes the gate to containment zone number 1. The Calamity becomes frightened and begins pounding on the door, trying to escape. But on the other side, the protagonist is proud of himself because, as the last descendant of his family, the leader of the terrorist organization known as the Pure Research Society, and the wicked alchemist Isao, this is how he should treat his experiments. Finally, everything is returned to the way it should be. He goes to the monitoring room, and his assistant asks whether he gave the Calamity the proper motivation, but the protagonist gets straight to the point and orders him to release Lucille. Although Cheese does not agree, he complies with the request, but warns that if the girl ends up dying, Isao must not come crying afterward. As soon as he releases Lucille, she becomes delighted because she can finally stretch her legs a little. She notices that the camera is focused on her and leaves a message telling Isao to prepare himself for a proper punishment. Cheese offers him a potato chip, but the protagonist refuses because they are all cheese-flavored, and he does not want any. Cheese is surprised because he has never complained about that flavor before and asks why he is making that expression. He then tells him not to worry because Lucille is wearing a suppression collar equipped with an alchemical matrix. If she is about to eliminate the girl, the device will completely neutralize the activity of the Black Plague virus inside her body. However, the most important thing at that moment is to make another bet to decide who will win the confrontation. Cheese says that he is betting on Lucille and that if she wins he will have the right to control the television remote for the following week. The protagonist bets on the final calamity because if she does not win she will die. Lucille tells the calamity not to bother trying to open the door because it is impossible. However, she notices that something is wrong with the girl as though she has no desire to fight whatsoever. That does not matter to Lucille in the slightest however because her main goal is the protagonist and once she wins the fight she will be able to reach him. Cheese warns the protagonist that Lucille is moving but the blonde girl still does not react at all. Lucille launches her attack calling the final calamity trash and declaring that she will become her food. However, the blonde girl simply grabs her hand and stops her from advancing, leaving Lucille shocked and unable to understand what is happening. Observing the scene, Izao and Cheese conclude that the calamity is sensing Lucille's killing intent and is about to enter combat mode. They celebrate saying that things are finally becoming interesting however the blonde girl is merely leading Lucille somewhere. She takes her rival to the door and points at it as though asking Lucille to open it. Watching this, Cheese becomes frustrated when he realizes that the blonde girl does not actually want to fight and merely wants Lucille to open the door, while the protagonist comments that this is impossible and calls the blonde girl stupid. Meanwhile, Lucille feels an overwhelming pressure and asks whether the calamity expects her to open that door. The calamity begins smiling as she nods. Lucille finds it pathetic because the supposed ultimate biological weapon the final calamity is nothing more than an idiot. Lucille grabs the calamity's hand and shows her how she will leave that room. She will be consumed by the Black Plague virus until nothing remains but a pile of brittle bones. Then she will be thrown into the non-recyclable trash and carried out of there. The calamity's body begins turning purple and strange markings appear all over it. Lucille continues acting arrogantly and says that apparently the ultimate biological weapon has just been poisoned. She says that the calamity had better remember that the most powerful biological weapon ever created by the young master will always be her and her alone. Ultra high risk subject number 0 the demonic mask, nightmare variant. Inside the monitoring room, the system begins warning that the Black Plague virus is spreading through the calamity cells, infecting her entire body, including her blood, flesh, and organs. The protagonist cannot believe what is happening, because they previously tested the blood cells of the Colossus of Despair, and they were capable of eliminating any pathogen that attempted to infect them, including the Black Plague virus. The calamity begins experiencing intense pain and can barely move. Lucille continues laughing and says that this is pathetic because apparently the ultimate weapon will die easily and the fight was not entertaining at all. Cheese also becomes desperate and tells the protagonist to stop the experiment immediately because the calamity is about to collapse. Isao, however, tells him to remain calm and observe the data, because it shows that the virus has infected only 30% of her red blood cells, 42% of her organ cells, and 38% of her nerve cells, figures that are still nowhere near the fatal limit. Only when she is on the verge of death can the blood of the Colossus of Despair truly awaken, forcing her to transform into the true final calamity. This is their only chance, so they need to remain calm. Lucille humiliates the calamity and asks the protagonist whether she truly is the final calamity because she is so weak that it is almost funny. The girl continues breathing heavily, unsure of what to do. Lucille tries to provoke her, saying that earlier the calamity was full of energy and trying to open the door, but now she remains completely silent. Cheese warns that the virus has already infected more than 70% of her cells and asks whether they're going to stop the experiment or not. The protagonist, however, stands firm and says not yet, asking him to wait a little longer. The inexhaustible heart is an artificial mechanical organ, so the virus cannot infect it. Furthermore, the virus has not yet reached her brain cells. Lucille realizes that nothing is happening and concludes that her master is not so attached to the girl after all. In that case, they can prepare to enjoy the show. Lucille tastes her opponent and thinks that even though she is a worthless experiment, she has an inexplicably delicious flavor. Now it is time for the grand premial ritual. Using her ability, she restrains the calamity. Cheese screams desperately because the virus has already infected 90% of her cells. They cannot wait any longer and he begs the protagonist to activate the matrix suppression collar immediately. Isao interrupts him. His assistant does not understand what is happening, but the protagonist merely says that it is not yet time. Cheese loses his patience and says that the girl is not ready and that they cannot simply stand by while Lucille devours her. Isao tells his assistant to be quiet because he only cares so much because the girl is beautiful, since he never showed compassion for any of the previous experiments. Moreover, he cannot forget their goal, which is to make the world bow at their feet and at the feet of the Percherade family. Both the final calamity and Lucille are merely tools for achieving that ambition. Suddenly, a trembling and extremely faint voice calls out to her master. The calamity has spoken her first words since being created, leaving Cheese astonished. He asks whether the protagonist taught her how to speak. Perhaps Isao gave her a quick lesson the previous night. After countless attempts by the calamity to climb into his bed and being thrown out by the protagonist, he teaches her that the word no means no, and that experimental subjects cannot sleep in the same bed as him. Even so, she continues trying as though upset. Isao is slightly moved and says that he will make an exception. If she can call him master, he will allow her to sleep in the bed for 30 minutes. Although her vocal cords were burned in the past, the Azoth solution he used to heal her completely restored all her injuries, including her vocal cords. The calamity tries to speak, but no words come out of her mouth. The protagonist thinks that if she cannot speak, there can be only one reason. Her vocal cords remain damaged for so long that she forgot how to use them. Calmly, he begins teaching her to speak and asks her to repeat after him. The calamity watches carefully and tries to pronounce the word, but still no sound comes from her mouth. After tremendous effort, she manages to say only ah. Isao finds it too difficult, decides to give up for the time being and tells her to go to sleep. Even though she does not want to sleep there, she accepts, and as she falls asleep she begins practicing the word master. Back in the present, she continues calling for her master. Lucille is impressed to realize that she can speak, but says that even if she calls for her master it will be useless because Isao has no need for a failure like her. Now it is time for her feast. At that exact moment, the collar is activated and Lucille falls to her knees. Isao is moved and pressed the button without thinking twice. To avoid revealing his true feelings, he agrees with his assistant and says that those implants are extremely expensive, so it would be a waste if Lucille devoured all of them. Cheese thinks that everything makes sense now, because it had never even occurred to him that the protagonist might have pressed the emergency button because the calamity called him master and moved him. After all, that would be impossible because he is the most wicked villain in the city. Isao thinks that now that everything has been clarified, he can go retrieve that useless girl. His assistant asks whether he needs help, but the protagonist says there is no need. A short while later, he approaches the calamity, who is still calling him master. Isao tells her to stop calling him that because she is not worthy of it. The protagonist picks her up, but the calamity continues calling him master. Isao tells her to be quiet and prepare to return to confinement. Lucille, however, cannot accept this and begins shouting, asking why. During all the previous confrontation tests, even when other experimental subjects were about to die at her hands, he never stopped the experiment. So why was he treating that girl differently? She was inferior to Lucille in every respect. Combat ability, physical strength, and even affection for the protagonist. Isao explains that the girl possesses many important transplanted organs and that if they were all devoured, the final calamity experiment could never continue. With a smile on her face, Lucille says that will not be a problem. Cheese, still inside the room, does not understand exactly why the protagonist made them waste time, because if he cared so much about the calamity, there was no need to conduct that combat test. The collar restraining Lucille begins losing its effectiveness. Cheese notices this and shouts for the protagonist to leave the containment chamber immediately. Isao asks why he is shouting so loudly. Cheese points out that the matrix suppression collar has just failed and that Lucille's body temperature is rising rapidly. The protagonist looks behind him and realizes that she is already standing beside him. Lucille explains that the collar is not broken because as the most powerful alchemist of the century, he should understand that viruses evolve to adapt to their environment. During the more than 1,000 days she spent imprisoned in that chamber, she deliberately activated the suppression collar's extreme cold matrix countless times. Finally, 1 week earlier, all the black plague cells in her body that could not withstand the cold had been completely eliminated. Now she has developed total resistance to cold. Isao tells her that she has won the contest and that he will keep the promise he made earlier. At that moment, he knows exactly what he needs to do. Remain calm because his only method of suppressing her has just failed and he cannot provoke her in any way. Lucille points out that spending only 1 day with him will not be enough. She then removes the protagonist's mask and begins infecting him with the Black Plague virus. This makes her extremely happy because she has finally managed to enter his body and can now actively sense the activity of every one of his cells. Cheese realizes that the protagonist has just been infected with the virus. Lucille tells the laboratory rat not to worry because the virus she implanted in him is entirely under her control and remains dormant. It will not attack his cells because how could she ever harm her beloved Isao? Unexpectedly, however, she notices that something is wrong. The Black Plague virus she implanted has encountered the natural calamity's salivary amylase inside the protagonist. This enrages her even further, and she begins crying, asking how that could be possible and whether that girl truly kissed her man. Cheese thinks the situation is becoming increasingly serious because Lucille's Black Plague is a viral aggregate with biological recognition at the cellular level. Because of her jealousy, Lucille attacks the calamity once again, saying that what she did is unforgivable, and that she will invade every one of her nerve cells, making her experience the ultimate agony of a fate worse than death. The calamity begins writhing in pain. Isao becomes worried because Lucille is the assimilated host of the most powerful virus he has ever created. The Black Plague is nearly invulnerable to any organic or inorganic compound. Even dragon spider toxin and the slime-producing agent are useless against her. The only thing capable of suppressing Lucille was the suppression collar's ultra-low temperatures. But now that she has developed resistance to the cold and eliminated her only weakness, he does not know what they can do. The void substance which is capable of annihilating everything is still in the experimental stage, and using it recklessly could destroy the entire base. He continues watching the scene, wondering whether there is truly nothing he can do. Cheese tells him that the protagonist himself is the solution because Lucille's obsession is overflowing. Lucille continues attacking, and although she does not know why she cannot infect the calamity's heart or brain cells, it does not matter, because she can still destroy everything else. Driven to the extreme, Isao points a weapon at himself and declares that this is his final warning. If she does not stop, she will never be able to have him again. Lucille is shocked, unable to understand why her master is genuinely threatening her over that idiot. The protagonist emphasizes that he already said the girl was not important, but her body is the single most crucial experimental resource belonging to his family. Without those resources, he will be unable to conquer the world or restore his family's glory, and if that becomes impossible, he will no longer see any reason to live. The laboratory rat is impressed to realize that the young master's acting skills have greatly improved. Lucille appears to calm down slightly and says that apparently this is how things must be. Isao cannot believe she agreed so easily and thinks that perhaps this could become a new way to control her, although it is far too humiliating. However, Lucille attacks again, saying that after dealing with that idiot she will help her little master rebuild his family and conquer the entire world. The protagonist expected this because she did not listen to a single word he had just said. The calamity is already on the verge of complete collapse. Isao realizes that he has no choice but to use his trump card. His assistant cannot believe that he had a trump card capable of restraining her all along and asks why he did not use it sooner. The protagonist did not use it because that trump card was far too embarrassing. He shouts that if she wants him to embrace her every night from now on, she must stop what she is doing. Lucille cannot contain herself and runs toward him, asking whether he is serious. The protagonist simply answers yes, and she begins imagining what all their nights together would be like. Isao asks whether she agrees to the deal. Lucille says that she may spare that piece of trash, but she has two conditions. The first is that she must trade places with the girl. The calamity will remain confined there forever while Lucille will live with the protagonist. Isao thinks her thirst for revenge runs very deep, but for now he only needs to agree and work on finding a new way to suppress her. He can deal with freeing the final calamity later. After he agrees to the first condition, Lucille says that the second is for the useless girl to wake up and watch carefully. Isao tries to say that there is no need for that, but Lucille points out that the filthy girl stole little Isao's first kiss, so she is still showing restraint. The protagonist tries to explain that the calamity does not yet understand such things, but Lucille simply begins kissing him. The calamity watches and her heart begins beating faster. She does not understand why her chest hurts so badly. Lucille continues taking full advantage of the situation. Cheese thinks that as the protagonist's friend he is happy for him, but he feels somewhat upset for the calamity. When the kiss ends, Lucille says that her master's kiss is truly perfect and that apparently he even uses the same violet-flavored toothpaste. Isao tries to use the sprays, but Lucille warns him that spraying them will make no difference because her cells have already taken permanent root inside his body. The calamity realizes that the protagonist did not enjoy what happened, and the pain in her chest grows even stronger. Her body begins reacting and the black plague cells inside her are simply wiped out. She is reborn like a phoenix. Lucille believes this is impossible, but the calamity grabs her by the neck and activates the left hand of the Angel of Ashes, leaving everyone astonished. The calamity says that she hates her and begins turning Lucille to ashes. Sometime earlier, during the filming of a movie, a young man complained that the molten feather phoenix had already eaten the food soaked in the pupil fluid of the crimson king dew butterfly, yet he could not understand why it had not lost consciousness. The phoenix continues attacking him with everything it has, and he simply accepts his fate because nothing else matters as long as Chow manages to leave Hell Ring Island safely. That alone would be enough. At that exact moment, a woman arrives, saying that sacrificing himself without her permission will not make her value him. Chow blocks the attack and the young man is impressed that she returned to help him. Chow easily contains all the flames and while touching his face says that from that moment onward he is forbidden from leaving her again. The two slowly move closer, but before the kiss Chow steps on his head in irritation because she already said that the scene was supposed to be filmed out of sequence. So who gave him permission to shove his foul-smelling mouth into the middle of the scene? The director calls for the filming to stop and informs Lord Xiaohu that they have prepared a banquet of deep-sea giant clams for him. Therefore, the Lord may take a break and eat something. If there is any problem with the chairwoman, she will personally investigate it. The place is Golden City at White Queen Film Studios, specifically temporary filming base number 12 located inside the crater of an artificial volcano. The director approaches the chairwoman and asks her to calm down. Chow is actually the White Queen, the city's second-ranked hero, the chairwoman of the film production group and the greatest actress in the world. The director explains that the young man is someone they have only recently hired, so he is unfamiliar with the rules. In any case, he resembles the first mayor. The chairwoman thinks there is only a slight resemblance because the young man does not possess even a trace of her father's aura. Furthermore, his acting is terrible and the expression he made while being burned looked extremely fake. Therefore, they need to replace him. The director agrees that her father founded the great city, but they have already interviewed more than 2,000 people and replaced more than 700, so the budget is running somewhat low. Chow says that if money is the problem, they should simply add another 200 million to the production budget of the film Feather Hunt, and instructs them to withdraw the amount from her bank. However, one of the women present informs the chairwoman that her bank has been robbed. Chow is surprised by the news. The woman continues explaining that the thieves were a para-human and a humanoid rodent. They placed a timed poison gas device inside the bank's ventilation ducts, paralyzing everyone inside before carrying out the robbery. She shows the device to the chairwoman, and as soon as Chow sees the symbol, she already has an idea of what it means. The woman continues saying that Homerka, the head of the Light District Security Patrol Department, was struck by an unknown biochemical weapon while searching for the two thieves, and was transformed into a disgusting slime. The Light District is now in complete chaos and is requesting assistance. The chairwoman interrupts her assistant and tells her to inform those useless patrol officers that they do not need to interfere in the matter. The assistant is somewhat surprised because the Light District is still the hero's assigned operational zone. Chow says that it does not matter whether she is currently on duty as a hero. Those thieves may possess the answer to a question she has wanted to resolve for a very long time. Therefore, her order is direct and clear. They must mobilize every group and find the thieves at any cost. The director asks what will happen to the filming. The chairwoman orders it suspended because she has more important matters to handle at that moment. During the suspension, the entire crew's salaries will continue to be paid as usual. The director thanks her but still has questions about the actor playing the male lead. Chow had nearly forgotten about him. She approaches the young man and asks whether he truly intended to kiss her. Terrified, the poor man apologizes, saying that he is deeply sorry and will never dare to do such a thing again. Chow creates a piece of ice and places it inside the young man's mouth, saying that if he can melt the extreme ice, she will spare him. Furthermore, if his face did not resemble her father's, he would have died the moment he dared bring his mouth near her. She thinks that no man in that world has the right to approach her except her own father. During her childhood, the Calamity was merely a poor girl. She accidentally knocks over a bucket of water and begins trembling in fear. An evil woman asks who gave her permission to clean the floor while she was playing with her toys. She snatches the teddy bear from the child's hands, throws it into the water, and begins trampling it, saying that holding something given to her by that bothersome person who's already dead brings bad luck. The girl apologizes to Aunt Shimon and begs her not to step on the toy, but her aunt simply slaps her across the face. The child's father holds his daughter and tells Shimon that spilling a little water does not justify such severe punishment. Shimon asks when the two of them began pretending to share such deep affection as father and daughter, and tells him not to forget who rescued him from a mediocre theater troupe where he was starving and turned him into the kingdom's playwright. Suddenly, a strange man appears and asks whether this is the family that voluntarily applied to provide a child soldier. Shimon says that it is and points at the young girl, saying that she is the stupid child in question. Mailer becomes frightened and asks who the man is and why he entered the house without even knocking. The man asks why he should knock because within the kingdom there is nowhere the Minquan organization requires permission to enter, not even the king's bedroom. Mailer is terrified to discover that the man belongs to the Minquan organization and asks what Shimon is planning to do. Shimon insists that she is merely trying to find a good home for that bastard woman's daughter, because she heard that members of the Minquan organization are trained from a young age. That is why she asked the girl's father and the Minquan commander to submit the application. The man looks at the girl and asks whether she is the only child. Shimon says that she is and adds that he should not be deceived by her small size because she is very strong, can go 3 days without food and still remain capable of speaking. She will definitely make excellent property for the Minquan. The man thinks the look in the girl's eyes is very promising and decides to take her. He picks her up while the girl cries out to her father that she does not want to go. Back in the present, she wakes up, looks to the side and sees her little bear. During the routine full-body examinations of the experimental subjects under anesthesia, Cheese asks why Super Rabbit number 1 has suddenly lost so much fur from its chest, when it was perfectly fine the previous day. Perhaps it is sick or something similar. The protagonist says that he does not know exactly what is happening, and soon asks his assistant whether the Calamity has awakened yet, because she has been unconscious for 3 days, ever since she defeated Lucille using the left hand of the Angel of Ashes. The laboratory rat explains that she has not awakened yet, but her vital signs are stable, so it should not be a serious problem. However, he still does not understand why the protagonist needed a needle and thread the previous day. Years earlier, several serum devices were connected to a machine monitoring a patient's heartbeat while a woman attempted to heal the leader of the underworld hounds, the Hound Master. A man enters the room and greets his master. He is the first of the underworld hounds and his name is Doberman. The leader asks how the elimination operation went. Doberman reports that Castor, Rottweiler, Papillon, and Gausso were eliminated by the city's heroes while attempting to infiltrate the Golden Zone. The leader cannot believe that not even his most powerful hounds managed to enter the Golden Zone and eliminate the traitors who betrayed the Latoma dynasty. Doberman explains that there is one exception. Yorkshire managed to survive, but she is currently missing. The leader shouts for him to find her immediately. Meanwhile, inside the protagonist's base, Isael paces back and forth and suddenly says that he has an idea. Cheese tells him to stop shouting like a lunatic because he is watching the interview following the Miss Gordon City pageant. The protagonist looks at the Calamity and says that in addition to her experimental codename, Final Calamity, her new codename will be Cool. Eager to explain why he chose that name, he asks his assistant whether he wants to know where it came from. The laboratory rat pretends to be interested and asks where such a magnificent name came from, as he would love to know. Isael remembers that his mother once told him her favorite flower was the Cool, and that he should not be deceived by its fragile appearance, because it bloomed only during storms, allowing its pollen to be carried far away by the powerful winds. However, he decides not to tell Cheese where the name came from. Cheese asked whether it is now official and whether the Calamity Girl has officially become the second extreme danger experimental subject after Lucille. The protagonist says yes, because from that moment onward the Calamity under the codename Cool is officially extreme danger experimental subject number 1. Her greatest advantage is her relatively docile personality, but her flaw is obvious. Her abilities are extremely unstable and she possesses no desire to attack. Therefore, they need to analyze the situation and determine what caused her to use the left hand of the Angel of Ashes. The first time she used it was in the containment zone. He reviewed the recordings from that night and it seemed that she hated sleeping there. The laboratory rat says that this is extremely obvious because she wanted to sleep with the protagonist, but Isael becomes irritated and tells him to be quiet so that he can continue his analysis. The second time he saw her use that ability was 3 days earlier when she fought Lucille. He assumes that upon seeing him bend down to spray disinfectant, she believed that Lucille was attacking him, which awakened her desire to fight. The boiling blood cocoon instantly expelled the Black Plague virus from her body and unleashed her ultimate attack, the thermal pressure vaporization cannon. Cheese asks the young master to stop giving everything such ridiculous names. The protagonist explains that this is the name he gave the technique Cool used with the left hand of the Angel of Ashes and that it sounds truly incredible. He continues his analysis, explaining that the cannon's temperature also varied significantly. The second time she released it, the instantaneous temperature was close to that of a solar eruption. Even the heat-resistant Black Plague virus was completely vaporized in an instant. Cheese points out that, if Lucille had not been wearing an extreme cold riot control collar capable of neutralizing some of the thermal energy, she would have died almost immediately. She barely managed to survive, but she has still not recovered. Cool's stomach begins to growl and she says that she is hungry. The laboratory rat argues with the young master and asks whether he has not fed her at all since she was created. Isao never imagined that she would still require such a primitive method of obtaining energy as eating. However, they do not need to worry because he will immediately give her the most nutritious and energy-rich food available. They go to another room, and Cheese asks whether his master has completely lost his mind and whether that is the food he prepared for Cool. Proud of himself, the protagonist says yes because he prepared the savage dragon. The two begin arguing about the situation, but the savage dragon suddenly wakes up and realizes that his elder sister and the protagonist are standing directly in front of him. The dragon becomes frightened because he has already suffered greatly, and attempts to behave more politely, bowing respectfully to the great alchemist master Baron Isao, and asking whether the time has finally come for him to be released from his penitent cell. Isao begins laughing and says yes because now he will also have an opportunity to redeem himself. The savage dragon becomes excited and asks what that opportunity will be. The protagonist replies that he must become food for the final calamity. This leaves the dragon in shock. The laboratory rat warns that the dragon is the only representative of a true dragon species among all the extreme danger experimental subjects, so offering him to Cool as food would be a waste. The young master does not necessarily agree because devouring a true dragon is the most efficient way for the calamity to replenish her energy. Furthermore, it may also trigger an evolution into her ultimate form. The protagonist tells her to devour experimental subject number 8. Cool becomes extremely excited and leaps onto his horn. The savage dragon becomes terrified and promises that he will never misbehave again. The protagonist, however, thinks that it is already too late. When Cool tries to bite his horn, she nearly breaks her teeth and returns to her master in tears. He takes her to the kitchen and prepares the most powerful meal on the planet, saying that a certain ninja ate a great deal of it and became the strongest of them all. The protagonist introduces her to instant noodles and 3 minutes later everything is ready. As soon as he removes the lid, Cool stares at the divine food with shining eyes. Before he can even hand her the chopsticks, he realizes that she is already devouring everything with her bare hands. Isao becomes concerned and tells her not to grab the food with her hands because it is probably extremely hot. The laboratory rat thinks that perhaps she does not know how to use chopsticks or is simply starving. Cool continues eating even with her hands completely covered in food and cries out that it is delicious. Isao says that it is only instant noodles, so there is no need for her to cry over it. Cheese thinks the reason is very simple. Apparently, she had not eaten much good food during her life. The protagonist finally understands because it is exactly like back when his assistant was nothing more than a miserable sewer rat who sneaked into his room to steal cheese. He ate so much that he nearly burst and could not even run. The laboratory rat becomes irritated and says that the protagonist has no right to talk because he is a brat who was still begging his mother for milk at the age of 3. Isao says that this is a complete lie because he stopped drinking milk at 6 months old and his mother forced him to drink it using the life-sustaining magic box. While the two argue, Cool finishes all the food and calls out to the protagonist, saying that everything was delicious. Isao stops arguing and begins wiping her face because it is completely filthy. However, even after eating, her stomach continues growling. Several cups later she finishes the last one, but apparently she still wants more. Isao asks his assistant to prepare another cup for hers, but Cheese warns him that it was the last one they had. 1 hour later, Isao is trembling with fear and tells her not to come any closer, because that is his last package of chocolate cookies and she needs to show some mercy. Although she did not behave that way while eating the instant noodles, a single serving of chocolate was enough to make her lose control completely. Cool continues approaching, utterly captivated by the taste of chocolate. Realizing that there is no escape, the protagonist decides to open the package and eat everything at once. Cool, however, does not care and tries to take the chocolate anyway. A few minutes later, the protagonist collapses onto the floor. Cheese hears a noise and thinks that his companion has already fallen and that the girl cannot be allowed to find that place. If she finds it, he will fight to the end even if it costs him his life, because it is his secret hiding place which he worked very hard to build. Cool crouches down and detects a scent coming from beneath the floor. She removes the rug and begins destroying the floor, which leads directly into the secret room. In less than a minute she breaks through it and enters. Prepared for her arrival, Cheese points his weapon at her and says that stealing the protagonist's snacks is one thing, but those cheeses are priceless, so she should not even think about touching them. With astonishing speed, however, she approaches him and begins melting the weapon with her bare hand. Meanwhile, inside the containment room, the Abyssal Eye asks the savage dragon whether he is alright, because he heard that the protagonist intended to offer him as food to their elder sister. The dragon merely laughs and says that they could never devour him because they have no idea how durable the body of a true dragon is. The toughest part of his body is his horn, which he tried to bite without leaving a single scratch. However, that tiny bite was enough to leave it almost completely destroyed, and as soon as he touches the horn, it simply falls off. The dragon panics because his great and majestic horns, which radiated power and enchanted every dragon, have simply disappeared. Cool is locked up because that is the only way to stop her from stealing the entire food supply. The protagonist concludes that countless pieces of evidence have proven that the creature has absolutely no resistance to high-calorie sweets, especially chocolate, which triggers an uncontrollable appetite, and compels her to obtain food by any means necessary, even by using the thermal pressure cannon. There was not even a single sesame seed left in the kitchen because she had eaten everything. Isao notices that his assistant is unusually quiet and asks why he is not saying anything. The laboratory rat explains that 400 blocks of the most expensive cheese in the world, premium-aged Storm Valley cheese, 10 of which were signed limited editions produced between the years 872 and 1012 of the new calendar, spanning nearly 140 years, were all devoured by her. Therefore, that evil experiment must be severely punished. He draws the emerald blade and says that he will cut her into 1,200 pieces, but the protagonist points out that she is a very cute girl. Cheese changes the punishment and says that in that case he will wash her eyes with alchemical aqua regia and king slime digestive fluid. The protagonist, however, continues saying that she is merely a cute girl. His assistant insists that he will have the brain-sucking bio-mosquitoes clean out her head, but once again the protagonist says that she is merely a cute girl. The laboratory rat becomes irritated and says that he understands, so they can simply give her a light spanking and settle the matter. Isao thinks that his assistant truly has not changed and that his weakness remains exactly the same. However, he acknowledges that Cheese is right. She needs to be punished or they will never be able to enjoy desserts inside the base again. He removes his glove, takes her to a corner of the room and asks whether she is ready to receive her punishment. The girl does not fully understand what is happening, and the protagonist thinks that she has the mentality of a 2 or 3-year-old child. For children of that age, a few firm spankings are the simplest and most effective punishment. He gives her the first spank and she lets out a small cry. The protagonist continues saying that this is for being so greedy, stealing their supply of sweets and desserts and recklessly using her powers. Sometime later she is crying, but Isao believes that this will teach her not to repeat what she did. The laboratory rat says that the real problem now is that the base has nothing left to eat except experimental feed, so they need to restock immediately. The protagonist agrees because he has not even eaten dinner and all of this is her fault. Cheese asks what they will do with Cool while they search for food and suggests that perhaps they could leave her at the base. Isao thinks that his assistant is losing his mind because she would destroy the entire place if he were not present. Therefore, they have no choice but to bring her along. They change their clothes and depart on Operation Food Acquisition, but one small thing is still missing. Cheese looks at her and concludes that if they are going to pose as villains they should at least do it with style. The protagonist agrees because even on a restocking mission they must maintain a certain degree of elegance. He activates the transportation matrix with the Lighthouse District as their destination. Slightly frightened, Cool holds the protagonist's hand, and he becomes confused because one moment she is far too bold and the next she is extremely timid. Everyone closes their eyes and after a brilliant flash they are transported to another location, their criminal paradise. Isao tells her to hold his hand because they need to leave. He picks her up and leaps, activating his anti-gravity matrix. Cool becomes slightly frightened, but as soon as she realizes that they are no longer falling she calms down. Now able to fly, they head toward their true destination in the city center. Cool is impressed by the heroine statue. Isao is already losing his patience because that rat is taking forever to buy a single hot dog. A boy walking with his mother asks her to look at the young lady climbing so high. Isao asks what idiot is climbing Camilla's statue because it is a high-priority inspection zone during hero operations, not to mention that the statue is under constant surveillance by the Security Patrol Department. Then he realizes that the boy said it was a woman. He looks beside him and sees that Cool is no longer there. When he looks up, he realizes that she is almost at the top of the statue and orders her to come down immediately. Cool, however, continues climbing, and when she reaches the top she waves at her master. Meanwhile, at the hot dog stand, the laboratory rat has restrained the vendor, because he already told him several times that he does not like mustard or black garlic, since he hates sour things. With the hot dog in hand, he returns to the square saying that it took a little longer than planned because that man would certainly cause trouble again. Suddenly, he notices a crowd gathering and several guards running toward the scene. Cheese cannot believe that he was gone for only a moment and all that chaos has already begun. A guard picks up a loudspeaker and announces that the statue is one of the city's landmarks and that climbing it is strictly forbidden. Therefore, if she does not come down immediately, they will be forced to use force. Cool becomes slightly frightened and does not know what to do. Cheese knows very well that climbing the statue without authorization is a serious crime and that even without causing any damage a person could face 1 year in prison. This cannot continue, so he needs to act as quickly as possible. Cheese puts on his sunglasses and turns his back, because now is the time to blend into the crowd and escape, since abandoning one's companions is standard procedure among villains. At that exact moment, the protagonist throws a flash grenade. The laboratory rat seizes the opportunity to discreetly cut the belts of all the guards nearby, telling the protagonist to get that disastrous girl out of there, because he will stay behind to hold off the guards like the selfless villain he is. Isao tells him that he saw him trying to escape earlier while pretending to be an ordinary spectator. As soon as one of the guards recovers his sight and tries to stand up, his trousers fall down, causing him to trip and collapse onto the ground. The three take advantage of the distraction and manage to escape. The protagonist points out that one day that idiot will end up getting everyone killed. At that moment, however, the manager of the Golden Elegance store shouts at them to keep their hands away from the display window. Another employee warns them that this is Golden Elegance's display window and that it is made of firefly crystal, a material easily corroded by the oils on people's fingers. If they leave marks on the glass, they will not be able to afford the repairs. Isao laughs and asks Cheese what they should do. Since the manager said the glass gets dirty very easily, the laboratory rat begins licking the entire display window, infuriating the manager. He calls them homeless vagrants and asks whether they are incapable of understanding simple words. Cheese begins sticking several banknotes onto the glass, leaving the manager astonished. The protagonist apologizes, saying that the glass now appears to have been dirted by a small tip, and asks what they should do about the situation. The employees' attitudes change instantly, and the manager begins laughing, asking what kind of dirt that could possibly be, since a little saliva can hardly even be considered dirt, because it is barely noticeable. He then invites them inside. Isao asks them to bring out the most expensive dresses available in the store. The manager begins removing all the banknotes stuck to the glass while the protagonist merely smiles and watches him. Once he has finished collecting the money, he addresses the protagonist as young master and asks what kind of clothing he is looking for. Isao explains that the clothes are not for him but for that woman. The manager approaches her and tries to find out what she would like to wear. Cool looks at him and gives a small smile. The manager is stunned by such a beautiful face, as he has never seen such perfection before. He had not noticed it from outside because he had been too busy inside the store. However, he thinks it is a shame because apparently that goddess has been enslaved by that scoundrel, which is a terrible waste. Isao asks them to bring out every evening gown available because she will try on each one. Several dresses are quickly brought over. Two attendants begin leading her inside, saying that they need to go to the fitting room and that since evening gowns can be difficult to put on alone, they will help her. Cool, however, is still somewhat frightened by the situation and calls for her master, but the protagonist tells her that she is only changing clothes and does not need to cause so much trouble. While he waits, the manager offers him some tea, but the protagonist says that he does not like that drink. Cheese is trying on several caps, and the protagonist says that he saw him hide a can before they left and demands that he hand it over. The laboratory rat tosses the can to him and tells him to be quiet because he is trying to choose a hat that matches his outfit. 20 minutes later, Isao is still waiting and cannot understand why they are taking so long. One of the attendants calls the protagonist over and explains that the young woman refuses to let them remove her clothes, so he may need to go in and help. Isao enters the fitting room and tells her to stop making a scene because he is right outside. Therefore, she only needs to cooperate with the other girls. Still confused, Cool eventually agrees. While changing clothes, she repeatedly calls for her master and he always answers that he is right there. A short while later, she emerges wearing the Scarlet Night evening gown, which costs 160,000 gold pounds. Isao is impressed by how good she looks in the dress. The manager presents the garment and asks what the protagonist thinks of the Scarlet Night design. an exclusive creation by their designers, saying that his girlfriend looks absolutely stunning. Isao explains that the girl is not his girlfriend but merely a servant and warns that if he makes that mistake again he will be punished. The manager cannot understand what kind of person takes a mere servant shopping for such an expensive dress. Apparently, those rich children care only about appearances. Isao considers the dress merely acceptable because it does not meet his standards and asks whether they have anything better. The manager explains that this establishment is golden elegance and that even the elite of the Golden District are among its regular customers. Therefore, if they cannot satisfy a customer, probably no one else in the city can. The second dress is the Golden Flower, which costs approximately 300,000 gold pounds. The protagonist admits that the garment has a unique design but it still lacks a certain dignity, so he would like to see another. Cole then tries on the Golden Empress dress, which costs almost 400,000 gold pounds. As soon as the protagonist looks at her, he's left speechless. The manager explains that this is the crown jewel of the store, the Golden Empress, and that it is said to have been modeled after the dress worn by the Empress of the Golden Empire herself. Suddenly, a limousine stops outside and a black carpet is rolled out. As soon as he sees the symbol on the vehicle, the manager remembers that he had completely forgotten that Lady Renee of the Black Palace was scheduled to visit the store that evening. The protagonist asks who she is. The manager apologizes but asks them to remain hidden in the fitting room for the time being. Furthermore, they cannot leave until she is gone because if she hears any noise he will be punished and the three of them will also be in serious danger. Lady Renee of the Haegong family steps out of the car accompanied by 2 bodyguards. As soon as her feet touch the ground she complains that they are becoming slightly cold. Akatanga tells her mistress not to worry because she will take care of it. With a simple movement she creates a path of fire and asks Lady Renee to proceed. As soon as she enters the store everyone goes to the entrance to welcome her. Renee gets straight to the point, saying that she heard one of the limited edition dresses she had been searching for that year was being sold at the store, and that she would like to see it. The manager informs her that they turned away every other customer so they could wait exclusively for her. Meanwhile, the protagonist watches everything. Cheese thinks that she may belong to the Haegong family, and the protagonist points out that it is one of the noblest families in the world. The laboratory rat explains that the world nobles reside permanently in Golden City's Golden District, which is their paradise, but he does not know exactly why that woman is there. The protagonist believes that even paradise can become boring because without commoners how could the nobles ever feel truly superior? The 2 people responsible for the carpet continue rolling it out until they approach the dress, but before they reach the end they run out of fabric. The 2 inform the young lady that all the available golden carpet has already been laid out. Akatengu becomes furious because they knew the young lady would be visiting the commoners' district, yet they still failed to prepare enough golden carpet. Apparently, they do not know that the young lady hates wearing shoes and are now trying to force her to walk barefoot across such a filthy floor. The 2 apologize and accept full responsibility. But she says that since this was an extremely serious mistake and they are servants of the family, they should already know what must be done. The 2 draw their daggers and shout that they must perform the blade heart ritual. Before they can do anything, however, the blades simply disintegrate. It was the work of Shinku, the Black Palace's other personal guard. One of them thanks him, but Shinka simply knocks both of them unconscious and tells the young lady to walk across their bodies. Cheese asks whether all world nobles are so arrogant, but the protagonist thinks that this is a wonderful opportunity, leaving his assistant somewhat confused. Isao explains that it is an excellent opportunity to kidnap the young lady of the Black Palace since the world nobles rarely leave the Golden Zone. Cheese thinks that this time the protagonist has completely lost his mind. Robbing a bank, defying the security patrol, and confronting the city's heroes is one thing, but kidnapping world nobles is far worse. Apparently, he is determined to make their lives extremely difficult. Isao says that everything they have done so far amounts to nothing and is not even worth mentioning. To make his family's name famous again, they obviously need to cause a major incident. The laboratory rat scolds the young master because apparently he does not know that every world noble possesses 1,000 years of heritage and immeasurable influence. All of them invested in the creation of Gordon City, which is like a childhood playground to them, a toy with which they can do whatever they please. Renee approaches the dress and the manager removes the covering to reveal the true masterpiece. Meanwhile, the 2 continue arguing inside the fitting room. The protagonist asks whether the second greatest villain in the city truly does not dare to provoke the world nobles. The laboratory rat says that this will not be enough to intimidate him, but that he needs to be fully prepared before doing something like that. Suddenly, they hear a scream. The masterpiece has been completely destroyed. Lady Renee feels insulted and asks whether that was truly the dress designed especially for her. Akatengu and Shinku are already preparing to attack and the protagonist knows exactly who was responsible. Cheese admits that he became a little bored while waiting for the girl to change clothes, so he decided to cause a small disturbance to irritate the store's snob. The two continue arguing, but Cole, who also wanted to see what was happening, ends up tripping over the dress and they begin to fall. Renee was interrogating the manager and ordering him to reveal immediately who had done it. But at that exact moment, the protagonist stumbled out of the fitting room, and the manager seized the opportunity to say that he was responsible for everything. Akatengu grabbed Isao by the shirt and began shouting, asking whether he had done it, and the protagonist merely laughed and said yes. Akatengu grew even angrier while the laboratory rat thought the man had gone insane because he could not understand how he could confess so easily. The store manager had no choice but to do that because if he failed to find someone to blame he would be punished. Akatengu did not like the look in Isao's eyes and decided to deal with him. The protagonist was merely waiting for the right moment to counterattack, but just then Lady Renee ordered her guard to stop because she liked him. Everyone was shocked, including Isao himself. Akatengu could not understand how her mistress could say such a thing because the man had ruined her dress and should lose at least one finger. Renee said that she did not want to repeat the order, so her guard released him, though she still warned the protagonist that he had better behave perfectly. Isao believed he had everything under control, and thought that, no matter what, the following day's headline would definitely read, "World Noble Young Lady of the Black Palace Family Kidnapped by the Great and Evil Villain Baron Isao." Perhaps he would use a dragon spider toxin grenade to resolve everything quickly, or the power suppression grenade, so he could enjoy tormenting them for a while. Renee moved a little closer and said that she knew his identity and understood what he intended to do, because from the moment she entered the store, he had been harboring extremely dangerous thoughts. The three of them were surprised, thinking that the young lady had noticed their presence. She moved even closer and said that she believed the protagonist was merely an intern at Golden Elegance who was dissatisfied with being nothing more than a commoner. After learning from the manager that the young lady of the Black Palace would visit the establishment that night, he had meticulously altered the dress and staged the incident, so that he could appear before her and attract her attention. He had probably done all of that to gain entry into her family. Isao felt somewhat relieved when he realized that she had understood absolutely nothing about what was happening. Lady Renee continued believing that she was correct. Although his motives were impure, considering his courage and risking his life to attract her attention, she had decided to give him an opportunity. If the protagonist knelt and kissed her feet, she might make an exception and allow him to become her servant. Jealous Akatengu could not believe that the young lady would allow some random man to kiss her feet when even she had never been granted permission to do so. Renee thought that this would be the first time she allowed a man to kiss her feet, so the young man would probably kneel and cry tears of joy. However, if he kissed them too enthusiastically, perhaps she should step on his head or kick him away. Isao merely asked who would want to kiss feet as smelly as hers. Once again everyone was shocked, unable to believe what he had just said. The protagonist continued saying that her family was so wealthy that he could not understand why she did not wear shoes. Walking barefoot like that would make her feet sweat and smell bad. Furthermore, she might have some kind of fungal infection from remaining barefoot for so long. She thought that the idiot was only adding fuel to the fire. Renee became so furious that she began crying and shouted that her feet were sprayed with perfume every day so they did not smell. She tried to slap the protagonist, but that was also part of his plan, because the moment she attempted to strike him, he would pull her close and throw the power suppression grenade, completing the kidnapping. Before he could make any move, however, Cole appeared and grabbed her hand because no one was allowed to strike her man. She had moved so quickly that not even the laboratory rat noticed when she emerged. Akatengu drew her sword, but Cole sensed her intention to attack and merely fixed her gaze on the blade. Akatengu ordered the woman to release the young lady's arm immediately. The protagonist became worried because this was not part of his plan. Cole continued merely watching while holding Renee's arm. Lady Renee told Akatengu to sheath her blade, but her guard refused because the girl had tried to attack her. Renee explained that she had not been attacked at all because the girl's intention was to protect the young man standing behind her. Isao realized that she had already discovered the relationship between them. Renee shouted that she liked the girl as well and wanted to keep her. Akatengu became embarrassed and asked the young lady what she had been reading lately. The manager could no longer understand anything that was happening. Renee received no response and thought that the girl was extremely arrogant and might already have made advances toward the young man. She observed Cole carefully and concluded that she was probably not a commoner because of her behavior and clothing. However, it did not matter which noble family she belonged to because once Renee of the Black Palace set her mind on something, she never gave up easily. She asked what price she would have to pay to obtain what she wanted, but the protagonist intervened, saying that her family would be the ones to determine the amount. Lady Renee became slightly confused and the protagonist explained. Putting on his mask, he declared that everyone had been kidnapped by Golden City's #1 villain, the genius alchemist of the Percerat family, Baron Isao. Akatenga realized his intention and shouted for the young lady to move away, but it was already too late. The protagonist detonated his grenade, leaving the two guards unable to react because both of them had lost their strength. And it was not only their strength that had disappeared, the young lady had also been taken. A few minutes later they were flying and the laboratory rat announced that their carefree days were officially over. Isao told his assistant not to worry so much because he had released the improved third-generation hippocampal neuron disruption agent. The substance caused severe memory distortions in anyone who inhaled it. By then, the two guards should already have been mentally confused. Shinko asked whether a frail white-haired boy had just kidnapped the young lady. Akatenga thought her partner was losing his mind because it had not been a frail white-haired boy but a chubby, freckled, blonde young man. The two continued arguing about it while Lady Renee was already tied up inside the protagonist's base. As soon as she awakened, Isao welcomed her to the greatest base belonging to Golden City's greatest villains, the Nightmare Nest, and introduced himself as the genius descendant of the great Percerat family of alchemists, Baron Isao. Cheese congratulated the young lady because tragically she had just become a hostage of the supreme evil villains. The two began laughing but Cole suddenly appeared behind them and started laughing as well, startling them. They began scolding her because the protagonist had ordered her to remain in the bedroom. So why had she left again without permission? The laboratory rat thought that she had ruined the entire sinister atmosphere they had worked so hard to create. Meanwhile, Renee removes the gag from her mouth with her tongue and mocks the two of them, saying that they call themselves the greatest villains in Golden City yet they cannot even gag a hostage properly. Hearing this, Cheese panics and whispers to Isao that their professionalism as villains has just been mercilessly trampled underfoot. The protagonist, however, cuts him off and reminds him that Cheese was the one who put the gag on her so he should not drag Isao into it. Cheese immediately retorts that by that logic Isao is also to blame since he was the one who tied her hands and feet. At that moment, they realize that Renee has already freed herself completely and is sitting there as though nothing happened. Isao becomes furious and asks whether that idiot simply stood there watching while she escaped from the ropes. Cheese defends himself, saying that she finished freeing herself while he was talking. When the two look at the chair again, they realize that Renee has already disappeared from it and without either of them noticing, has moved to the sofa, opened a bag of snacks, and begun eating calmly. Isao approaches and tells the girl to understand her position as a hostage, warning that if she continues causing trouble, he will make her experience the true terror of alchemy. Renee asks whether it can be more frightening than the Kuroya family's private punishments. And when Isao asks for examples, she explains that there is the layered crushing pit, in which the condemned person is trapped at the bottom of a cross-shaped hole, and several thin iron plates are placed over their body. At first, they feel almost nothing, but as more plates are added, all their bones and organs are slowly crushed. Another punishment is the flaming helmet of agony, in which an almost molten iron helmet is placed over the victim's shaved head. The best of all, however, would be the 12 centipede nests. 12 small holes are opened in the condemned person's body and centipedes are raised inside them, allowing the victim to watch their own body become a nest in which the creatures lay their eggs. After hearing all of that, Cheese begins coughing nervously and asks purely hypothetically whether they could return Renee, say that everything was a misunderstanding, and avoid having the Kuroya family use those punishments on them. Isao becomes outraged and asks whether he has become some kind of charity for missing children, while Cheese shouts that he was merely mentioning a possibility. Renee tells them not to worry because none of those punishments would be used on the two of them. Cheese is immediately relieved, but she adds that those are among the Kuroya family's lightest punishments, reserved only for minor cases of unauthorized physical contact. The punishments reserved for their situation would be so terrible that they would come to hate even the creator for allowing them to be born into that world. Upon hearing this, Cheese nearly soils himself. Even so, she assures them that she will not allow her family to inflict any of those punishments and that besides not blaming them for the kidnapping, she is willing to offer them an enormous sum of money provided they accept one condition. When Cheese asks what it is, Renee declares that she wants to join them and become a villain as well. leaving Isao and his assistant completely confused. She explains that she is bored and believes that by their side, she will be able to commit crimes and have fun. Furthermore, the fact that they created weapons capable of incapacitating Akatangu and Shinku proves that they truly possess skill, so she could become the group's secret financier. To demonstrate that she is serious, Renee shows them a black card from G-Bank, causing Cheese to recoil in shock when he recognizes it as Golden City's highest-tier credit card and asks how such a young girl obtained something of that level. Isao, however, realizes that the proposal cannot be so simple and asks what her other demands are. Renee praises his cleverness and reveals that besides accepting her into the group, the two of them will have to obey every one of her orders without question. Isao prepares to tell the girl to keep dreaming, but Cheese interrupts him and immediately agrees, promising that both he and Isao will obey the young lady Kuroya. Without wasting any time, the rat asks how much she intends to invest in their crimes and when the money will be transferred, commenting that the very same day seems perfect for closing the deal. Isao is furious that Cheese has abandoned all dignity as a member of the Perserad family and made that decision without his permission. Cheese merely replies that finding someone to finance the group would be excellent, because then they could focus entirely on planning the ultimate crime capable of shaking the whole world. Isao, however, makes it clear that he is the current head of the Perserad family and refuses to accept the agreement, saying that his clan will never accept orders or charity from anyone. Maintaining his decision to treat Renee as a hostage, he orders Cheese to administer a dose of dragon spider toxin to her, tie her up again, and after 24 hours send a letter to the Kuroya family demanding a ransom. Renee warns him that the plan is useless because they will not receive a single coin for kidnapping her. Hearing this, Isao becomes confused and she explains that according to the Kuroya family's principles, the clan's interests and dignity take precedence over the life of any individual member. The moment a family member is kidnapped, that person is considered exiled, so they would never negotiate with the kidnappers. Instead, they would do everything possible to hunt them down, kill them brutally, and display their bodies as a demonstration of the family's authority. Cheese is frightened by the coldness of that custom, but Renee announces that she has changed her mind and offers an enormous sum to finance the group without requiring them to obey all her orders. In exchange, she asks for help with only one thing: killing Kuroya Inju, the current head of the Kuroya family. Isao recognizes the name and asks whether that man is not her father. Renee calmly confirms that she is referring to her own father and, with a smile, taunts the two of them by reminding them that they call themselves the greatest villains in Golden City, and asking whether they are truly afraid to accept a mission like that. Later, while everyone enjoys the feast purchased with the advance payment, Cheese comments that he thought Isao would refuse Renee's request. The protagonist asks why he would do that in the face of so much money, since she was asking him to kill her father, not his own. Cheese retorts that even if Renee ordered Isao to kill his own father, he would not even know whom to look for. Isao explains that his mother promised to reveal that identity once he fully inherited the Perseid clan and took control of Golden City. Cheese comments that their masters love keeping secrets and have been doing so for centuries, but decides to set the matter aside and take things one step at a time. For now, they should simply enjoy the feast because the girl from the Kuroya family was truly generous, giving them 20 million gold pounds as an advance, an amount greater than what they could obtain by robbing 10 banks. Meanwhile, at the Kuroya family residence, Akatengu and Shinku are about to be punished for failing to protect Renee. The head of the family talks about improving the 12 centipede nests by replacing the insects with spindle-shaped leeches, which can enter human orifices more easily and lay 100 times as many eggs. Approaching with a sinister smile, he says that those who are incapable of protecting their own mistress deserve to serve as test subjects for those improvements. Desperate, Akatengu begs for another chance and promises to rescue the young lady, but the man mocks her, reminding her that they cannot even remember what the kidnappers looked like. Just as he is about to begin his game, Shinku decides to redeem himself through the Blade Heart ritual. However, Renee appears at that moment, asks her father to stop and shows that she is perfectly fine. Upon seeing his daughter, the family head abandons his threatening demeanor and runs to embrace her, celebrating her safe return. Later, Renee sits outside and begins gazing at the moon. Akatengu approaches, bows, and thanks her emotionally because the young lady's arrival saved both of them from punishment. Renee takes out a bag of snacks and opens it, leaving Akatengu confused. She then offers her some, saying that they are delicious and asking her to try them. Still surprised, Akatengu says that this type of food is forbidden in the Kuroya residence and tries to find out where it came from. Renee merely tells her to eat without asking so many questions. Akatengu tastes the snack, is impressed by its flavor and texture, and begins devouring it while asking how Renee managed to escape from the kidnappers. The young lady merely smiles and says that it is a secret. Meanwhile, in the nightmare nest, Cheese comments that he never imagined the Kuroya family would be so strict with this direct bloodline, as its members begin training in martial arts and assassination techniques at the age of 5. By analyzing the surveillance footage, Isao discovered that Renee had hidden 26 blades and 13 needles within her sleeves and hems, moving so discreetly that they would never have noticed without the recordings. She had several opportunities to slit both their throats but did nothing. She recalls that the girl wanted to turn Isao into her pet and jokes that she intends to become his sugar mama only in a different way. Isao threatens to place Chi inside a box with his essential belongings and ship him directly to the Kuroya family if he is so eager to become someone's pet. The protagonist makes it clear that the agreement consists solely of killing Kuroya Inju and helping Renee, because after that, he wants nothing more to do with the brat who turned her own kidnapping into a joke. She tries to make him see the positive side, explaining that if they defeat Inju and help the young lady take control of the Kuroya family, they will never have to worry about funding again. He then reminds Isao that he at least got his revenge before letting her leave. At that moment, Renee was tied up and demanding that the protagonist release her, warning him that she hated having the soles of her feet touched. Even so, the protagonist continued tickling her, leaving her flustered. He then revealed that the object was a genetically modified creation made from foxtails and stinging caterpillars, which he had named the butt-itching bug. Isao explained that the creature exponentially increased the sensation of itching on any part of the skin, and that, when it touched sensitive areas such as the soles of the feet or the armpits, it made the agony unbearable. As punishment for underestimating Golden City's greatest villains, Isao continued tickling Renee's feet, making the girl scream and writhe for an entire hour. Back in the present, Renee lies down on her bed, swearing that she will never forgive that filthy bastard. Meanwhile, inside an interrogation room, a detective questions the manager about the loss of 800,000 gold pounds. He explains that the amount was so high because the 3 destroyed dresses were exclusive pieces created by a famous designer. The problem is that the description he provided does not match the composite sketches based on the testimony of the Kerala family's employees. Even Renee claimed that the kidnappers were a chubby, freckled blonde boy accompanied by a skinny rabbit man. The manager insists that everyone is lying because he clearly saw a black-haired boy with bangs covering one eye and a disgusting rat man. Even so, the detective explains that under the witness information collection policy, he cannot accept testimony that contradicts every other account. At that moment, a girl enters the room asking where the poor fool who lost 800,000 gold pounds in a single night is. The detective becomes irritated by the intrusion and begins ordering the girl to leave the interrogation room, but she quickly pulls out her badge and with a smile, Baba Polia informs him that she is not just anyone but his new chief. Staring at her breasts, he asks whether she is truly the new chief. Without any ceremony, the girl throws herself into the chair, places her feet on the desk, and asks whether she does not look worthy of the position. Baba Polia also claims that high-ranking security patrol officers usually sit that way and asks whether he knew that. Completely confused, the detective tries to understand what is happening, but Baba Polia concludes that he must be the type of subordinate who needs a small bribe to behave properly. Since she finds the young man cute, she allows him to touch her once, but warns that afterward, he will have to obediently become her dog. Finding the entire situation completely absurd, the man storms out of the room and slams the door, deciding to find the entrance guards and ask how they allowed such a hyperactive punk girl to invade the building. However, as soon as he looks ahead, he sees Torrin Blackhorn, captain of Investigation Team 1, who asks Mark whether he properly greeted the newly appointed chief when she visited Interrogation Room Number 1. Only then does Mark realize that the girl truly is the new head of the branch and asks whether Torrin is joking, but he seriously replies that Minotaurs never joke. The other detectives begin teasing Mark, saying that they also met the new big shot, while one of them celebrates having received a lollipop and concludes that working in the Beacon District will bring them great fortune. One even declares that from that moment onward, bringing water to the chief's office will be his exclusive responsibility and that no one will be allowed to steal that duty from him. Torrin orders everyone to be quiet and warns them not to underestimate Baba Polia. Ever since Homiarch was transformed into sludge by the mysterious pair of bank robbers, the position of chief of the Beacon District Security Patrol has been contested by several other branches. However, headquarters never issued a definitive appointment, causing the situation to drag on for an entire year. Torrin continues explaining that the dispute ended only that day, when a new chief named Baba Polio was suddenly dispatched by headquarters. Suspicious of such an unexpected appointment, he asks the archives department to investigate her entire professional history. Mark immediately asks what they discovered, and Torin quietly explains that there is no record of Baba Polia anywhere within the security patrol, so she was probably transferred into the organization from outside by order of some powerful figure. At that instant, Baba Polia appears directly behind them and asks who this powerful figure might be, startling all the officers who immediately line up and await her orders. The new chief tells everyone to relax, saying that she is nothing like those old bureaucrats obsessed with monopolizing power. She explains that her working style can be summarized as fun, passion, and highly unconventional methods. One of the officers mutters that it seems to involve far more than just that, but Baba Polia hears him and approaches, praising his honesty for directly pointing out his own chief's mistake. She holds the young man's face and announces that he deserves a reward, causing the officer to imagine that he is finally about to receive a kiss. However, Baba Polia merely sticks one of her favorite Greedy Frog collection stickers onto his face, leaving him completely disappointed. Officially assuming command, she declares that the old White Queen bank robbery case, the kidnapping of the young lady Karuya, and the theft of the formal attire will now be investigated as a single case. To increase everyone's motivation, Baba Polia promises that whoever uncovers an important clue and helps solve the crimes will earn the right to go on a date with her. The offer drives the officers into a frenzy, causing them to rush out to solve the case. Even Torin joins the competition, prompting one of the men to ask why he is competing for the date when he has always claimed not to like skinny human women. Torin tells his subordinate to be quiet and insists that he is interested only in solving the case, but no one believes that excuse. As everyone begins competing for clues, Baba Polia looks at a photograph and promises to capture the boy who challenged the authority of the security patrol. She reveals that she was in the square at the time and therefore did not fall for the tricks the group used to confuse the witnesses. Meanwhile, at the Grand Theater of Golden City, two employees prepare the entrance while discussing the fact that Mile will perform there the following Friday. One of them confirms that he is the famous playwright from the feudal empire of Latoma on the western continent, although the assassin squad under his command, the Hellhounds, is even more famous. After all, the entire region trembles merely upon hearing that name, and the group once invaded the Golden District to assassinate world nobles. To stop the invaders, the city had to mobilize 3 heroes holding gold licenses, yet one of the assassins still managed to escape. At that moment, Cole enters the theater wearing her luxurious golden dress and walking arm in arm with Isao. One of the employees becomes distracted while staring at the girl's backside, until Cheese threatens to tear out his eyes and hang them from a string if he continues looking at the young lady that way. The man apologizes immediately, but his colleague realizes that he allowed the group to pass without checking their invitation. Even so, the employee prefers not to cause trouble because Cole's appearance, bearing, and clothing make it obvious that she must be some young noblewoman. Once they have moved away, Isao praises her, saying that her grand entrance looked quite natural. His assistant, however, warns that next time Isao will have to play the lackey because he has no intention of continuing to be treated as a subordinate every day. While giving Cole a lollipop, Isao explains that the true purpose of their visit is to completely memorize the internal layout of the Grand Theater. During the performance the following Friday, Kuroya Inju will be present alongside a crowd of nobles and other important figures, so they need to know every passageway before putting their plan into action. As they walk through the corridors and examine paintings of previous performances, Cole stops in front of one and stares at it. Soon they come across a pair of enormous doors and the protagonist announces that they have reached the main hall. Before entering, Cole remains focused on the poster bearing Miles' portrait. 2 hours after watching the play, Isao leaves the main hall and approaches Cheese, asking whether the map is ready. Cheese assures him that it is, saying that he even recorded the location of every trash can in the building. However, as they prepare to leave, Isao realizes that Cole is not with them and asks where she went. Cheese also looks around, saying that he has not seen her and that she has been gone for quite some time. Still standing before Miles' poster, Cole reaches out and touches his face in the image. At that moment, a voice comes from behind her and asks whether the girl is a fan. With great warmth, Miles approaches and remarks that he had always heard Golden City was the center of the world and that, now that he has finally arrived, he realizes the place is 1,000,000 times more magical and beautiful than the stories claimed. Therefore, being able to perform in that theater is the greatest honor of his life. He then looks at Cole curiously and says that he would like to know the beautiful young woman's name, but she becomes nervous and can barely speak. Before she can answer properly, a girl appears, calling out to her father. Jimin scolds the girl and tells Mayila to show some respect, since other people are present. Mayila, however, does not care and replies that there is nothing wrong with it, since her father is none other than the world-famous playwright, Mile. Mile merely diffuses the situation, tells them to let it go, and mentions that the young woman is one of his fans. However, when he looks back, he realizes that she is no longer there. Meanwhile, outside the theater, rain begins pouring down heavily. One of the employees comments that he does not remember seeing any rain in the previous day's forecast, while the other complains that he envies the gentlemen inside, embracing beautiful women and watching plays while they are stuck outside standing guard in the rain. A short while later, upon seeing Cole alone without an umbrella, one of them offers to help her and asks whether she would like to use his umbrella, but she simply ignores him and continues walking. She wanders through the dark and gloomy streets, passing sinister alleys that not even Batman would dare enter. While walking down one of those dark streets, Cole bumps into a hooded man, who complains and tells her to be careful because an old man's shoulders cannot withstand such a hard impact. Even so, she ignores him and continues walking until she passes a woman who remarks that her socialite appearance does not suit a dark street like that at all. Unable to understand what is happening and completely lost, Cole crouches down and repeatedly asks herself who she is. At that moment, a white-haired woman approaches, calls her a poor little sparrow, and asks whether she has lost her way home. Then, after observing Cole carefully, she says that a beauty like her should not be wandering around alone and invites her to join them and become one of the 1,000 birds. However, she makes it clear that members of the 1,000 birds are not allowed to keep personal belongings, so Cole will have to surrender her clothes to the organization. When the blonde woman tries to take the dress, Cole grabs her hand, causing the woman to lose her patience and order her to let go before she becomes angry. In her hesitant way, Cole tries to explain that her master gave her those clothes and that she therefore cannot remove them. The woman warns that she clearly has no idea what she is getting herself into and suddenly slaps Cole violently. She then mocks her, asking why she still has not taken off the dress, while Cole continues saying that she cannot remove it. The woman smiles, and displaying her feather-shaped blade says that since Cole does not want to take it off herself, she will help her. Dove begins attacking rapidly, cutting the dress and injuring Cole, who remains defenseless, and simply endures the beating without fighting back as the blades destroy her clothes. At the same time, elsewhere, Cheese is already trying to track Cole by scent, and the protagonist asks whether his assistant can smell her. Cheese tells him to stop talking nonsense and simply follow him. As the rat begins tracking her while practically crawling along the ground, Isel mocks him, saying that it cannot even be called walking but crawling. Cheese merely tells him to be quiet. A short while later, they reach the alley and the assistant confirms that Cole is nearby, pointing out that she entered that way. Even though the heavy rain washed away almost all her scent, his nose still managed to detect a faint trail left by that disastrous girl. Isel wants to move forward immediately, but Cheese stops him and tells him to remain calm because Black Star Street lies just ahead, the filthiest and most chaotic gutter in the outer reaches of the glamorous Beacon District. He also remarks that someone could get lost anywhere else in the district without facing serious trouble, but disappearing in that place is a different matter entirely. Even so, Isel points out that it is ultimately nothing more than a gathering place for despicable criminals, and asks whether Cheese is afraid of a bunch of opportunists. Cheese corrects the protagonist, explaining that those criminals are not merely low-level thugs because that place is the stronghold of the 1,000 birds. He reminds him that every member of the group is extremely troublesome and that not even the Beacon District Security Patrol has been able to deal with them. Meanwhile, inside the 1,000 birds hideout, Cole remains unconscious on the floor, covered in cuts, with her golden dress almost completely destroyed. Several members observe the girl and one asks whether the leader truly needed to tear apart such a beautiful outfit, while another comments that she went too far. Suspicious, one of the women points out that Cole seems questionable and could even be an undercover security patrol agent, so she believes they should interrogate her. Sitting calmly in front of the injured girl, the white-haired leader says that their new little sister does not yet understand the group's rules and appears to require proper training. A blonde woman approaches Cole and, after examining her face, remarks that the poor girl looks utterly devastated. Then, a short-haired woman says that they do not need to worry about that because men are the most disgusting and useless creatures on the planet, fit only to become their dogs. When she asks whether everyone agrees, the group immediately says yes and admits that men are nothing but trash. Still wanting to confirm the girl's identity, the leader calls Raven and asks her to use Soul Search to investigate Cole's mind. Raven accepts the order, silently approaches, kneels beside the blonde girl and places a hand on her head. A greenish energy begins surrounding Cole as Raven invades her memories, and the first image that appears in her mind is Isao caring for her, and asking whether she truly makes a living with that face. Raven also sees a memory of Mile affectionately embracing his daughter inside the theater, while the blonde girl merely watches from a distance. Soon afterward, the memory shifts to a dark corridor where Mila desperately reaches toward her father and begins screaming for him. Then, the memories become even darker, showing Cole barefoot, sitting on the wet and filthy floor of a cell with her hands clasped together. A heavy boot steps into the puddle in front of her, and moments later, Doberman throws a piece of bread onto the ground. As soon as the bread rolls across the cell, several thin, filthy children violently attack one another in desperation, fighting to seize the food. One boy manages to raise the bread as though he has won, but a blonde boy charges at him with a brutal elbow strike, takes the piece and bites into it. In the next instant, however, someone strikes him on the head with a rock. Raven sees herself holding the bread and smiling menacingly as she warns that she does not like hitting girls, so Cole had better not try to steal what belongs to her. Doberman declares that a hound that does not fight for its own food will not survive in that place. In the background, an imposing voice continues the training, telling them that they are all hellhounds sent directly from the abyss, that their sole purpose is to obey their master, that without an order they are forbidden to fall, that as long as they still draw breath, they must remain standing, and that they must drag their enemies into the abyss with them. Back in the present, Raven is shaken by what she has just seen and begins to suspect Cole's true identity. At the same time, Isao and Cheese have already reached the alley and the protagonist corners one of the men there, demanding that he immediately reveal whether he saw a beautiful girl wearing a golden dress. Isao also warns him that one of his precious test subjects has disappeared and that he is in an extremely bad mood, so if the man dares to lie, he will end up like his friend beside him. When the man looks to the side, he nearly soils himself upon seeing another man lying on the ground with a giant mosquito sucking on his head. Meanwhile, Cheese thinks that the BioBrain mosquito was one of Isao's inventions, but even he considered it far too extreme to use. That day, however, the situation was different. Unable to endure the pressure, the man panics and reveals that he saw the girl, explaining that their leader, the Silver Phoenix, took Cool to that warehouse and said that she would train her properly. The protagonist orders the man to get up and lead them there, and he readily agrees. They quickly reach the location but are stunned by the scene before them. They find a true massacre, with several bodies scattered across the floor and blood everywhere. The protagonist crouches beside one of the corpses and concludes that the cause of death was a blade wound across the throat. Looking around, his assistant realizes that every victim died in exactly the same manner with their throat slit. Isao finds this strange because if Cool had lost control, she would probably have used the thermal pressure steam cannon. Therefore, it made no sense for every victim to have wounds inflicted by a blade. At that moment, they hear a woman's faint voice calling for help. Isao calls Cheese over and tells him that there is still a survivor. As he approaches, the assistant examines the severely wounded woman who is barely alive and recognizes the tattoo on her back, realizing that she is the Silver Phoenix, leader of the 1,000 Birds. However, he becomes distracted when he notices that even her buttocks are surprisingly smooth. Isao tells him to stop fooling around and stabilize her immediately so that they can interrogate her, because if they delay any longer, she will truly die. Cheese administers a spinal injection of human tissue repair serum using the emergency formula, and 3 minutes later, the woman finally regains some consciousness. Still trembling, the Silver Phoenix says that she was unable to see the blade that attacked her. Isao reminds her that they just saved her life and demands that she explain what happened there, asking whether the woman in the golden dress killed everyone. The leader, however, replies that she does not know and has no idea what truly happened. 1 hour earlier, while Raven was searching through Cool's memories, the girl grabbed her arm and broke it with a single movement, causing her to scream in pain. The other members of the 1,000 Birds immediately looked in their direction, alarmed by what was happening. However, they noticed that something had changed as Cool's blonde hair had turned purple again. She then stared coldly ahead while still holding Raven's broken arm. Suddenly, 3 phoenix feather blades were launched at her, but Cool reacted instantly, catching 2 with her hands and trapping the third between her teeth. The leader was astonished because the girl had managed to stop all 3 attacks at once. Even so, the short-haired woman attempted to intimidate her, warning that this was the territory of the 1,000 Birds and that, if she did not release Raven, she would not leave alive. However, after recognizing the memories she had just searched, Raven realized that Cool was a member of the Hellhounds. The blonde woman was also shocked when she understood that this was the assassin who had invaded the Golden District and dared to attack the world nobles. Realizing the extent of the danger, the Silver Phoenix changed her attitude and approached Cool, asking her to release Raven and saying that she was willing to pay any price. The short-haired woman still believed that the rumors might have been exaggerated and suggested that they all attacked together, since they had the advantage in numbers, but the leader ordered her to be quiet immediately. Attempting to prevent a massacre, the Phoenix assured Cool that they would keep her identity secret and tell nothing to the security patrol, since the Thousand Birds cared neither about the officers nor those corrupt world nobles. Cool finally made her demand and ordered the leader to remove her clothes. The Phoenix was left speechless but eventually obeyed and began undressing in front of everyone. Outraged by the scene, the short-haired woman complained that the leader was abandoning all the dignity of the Thousand Birds simply because Cool ordered her to. Raven, however, told her to be quiet and made it clear that if the Silver Phoenix had not surrendered, they would all already be dead. While the Silver Phoenix was still searching for something to wear, the blonde woman smoked calmly and began mocking Falcon, saying that she had the smallest chest among all the Thousand Birds. Falcon became irritated and retorted that at least she could roll around in bed without becoming trapped beneath her own body. Having lost her patience, the leader ordered the two of them to stop arguing and hurry to find her some clothes. At that moment, Raven commented that she still did not understand why Cool had spared them, because considering the Hellhounds' history, none of them should have survived. A voice hidden in the shadows agreed and said that, according to the assassin's usual methods, they should all already be dead. Falcon noticed the intruder's presence and asked who was there, but Doberman appeared before the group and attacked before they could react. He slit Falcon's throat and she collapsed, bleeding onto the floor, still managing to tell the leader to run before dying. The blonde woman's throat was also cut in the blink of an eye, and the same happened to Raven. Doberman appeared behind the Silver Phoenix and mocked Golden City's underground gang, saying that they were all pathetic and that killing those women was even easier than crushing a rat from the Latoma Empire. Back in the present, Cheese finally understands that Cool was not responsible for the massacre, but he still finds it strange that such a powerful member of the Hellhounds had previously lost to an old man like the Bullet Knight. Isao, however, is more concerned about something else. Cool's hair turned purple again. To him, that should be impossible because the Cocoon of Despair experiment had already been tested thousands of times, and had never caused a transformation like that. Still gravely wounded, the Silver Phoenix crawls toward them, and begs them to save Raven and the others, promising to do anything, and surrender control of the Thousand Birds to them. Cheese tells her that he will hold her to that promise, and begins examining one of the fallen women. After checking her eyes, he notices that her pupillary response has already disappeared, and concludes that conventional treatments will not be enough. To save them, they would have to use that special technology, but Isao tells him to leave it aside for now, because they need to find Cool and recover her as quickly as possible. If they lose her at that moment, it would be the same as throwing away the most important experiment they have ever produced. As he is dragged away, Cheese asks for only a few seconds to administer a preservation agent to the woman, preventing her condition from worsening while they search for Cool. Isao continues dragging Cheese outside, saying that he will not leave anything for later, since the assistant himself was always claiming that saving people was a useless habit. Cheese shamelessly admits that he is a hypocrite and asks whether there is a problem with that. Before he is dragged away completely, he throws a box to the Silver Phoenix, leaving the woman confused, and shouts for her to inject its contents into her companions, because otherwise their bodies will decay beyond repair. Meanwhile, on the sea bridge over Naila Bay, Cool walks alone beneath the rain and begins examining her own body. First, she inspects her left arm, then touches her right eye, and finally places a hand over her heart. After realizing that every part destroyed in the past is intact once again, she begins wondering whether that boy was truly the one who saved her. However, the conflicting memories leave Cool even more confused, because she does not understand why she possesses memories that seem to belong to someone else, nor can she be certain that the identity is truly her own. At that moment, Doberman appears behind her and remarks that it has been a long time since they last met, calling her Yorkshire. Cool immediately recognizes the man and speaks his name. Doberman approaches and demands her mission report, wanting to know how the assassination of the Black Palace's leader failed and, above all, why Yorkshire disappeared for so long afterward. Cool explains that she managed to infiltrate the Black Palace estate, and remained hidden while waiting for an opportunity to act, but suddenly realized that she had been poisoned. Soon afterwards, he was ambushed by a man dressed as a priest, a swordsman who introduced himself as the Blade of Dawn and Dusk and severed her left arm and leg. Doberman immediately recognizes the title, and explains that the man is the most powerful swordsman of the Divine Mandate Order, known as the Living Law. Furthermore, he possesses a Gold Hero license, and ranks 5th among Golden City's heroes, so it is not surprising that Yorkshire was defeated. Even so, what truly puzzles Doberman is seeing her completely restored, since both her arm and leg had been torn off. Cole replies that someone saved her, but she does not know who it was because she remained unconscious throughout the entire process. Doberman decides that it does not matter and makes it clear that as long as she is still breathing, her mission will continue. Cole lowers her head, touches her chest, and answers, yes. At that moment, however, Isao appears and declares that from that day onward she will have only one master, him. Doberman does not recognize the voice and asks who is there. He then sees the protagonist emerge and calmly walk toward them.